Halo Season 2 is one of the most poorly written things I've ever actually sat through on television. I'm going to be discussing the show on its own merits, and only reference the lore as a demonstration of how they pulled random things from it, and more often than not made it worse because they don't understand it or they don't care. As far as the show goes, the plot is broken on fundamental levels, the world building is all over the place and completely eviscerated, the characters are stupid a majority of the time for the story to happen, they're unlikable, they're inconsistent. I like to say that these inconsistent characters have what I call Kylo Ren syndrome, where they pretty much just behave however they're needed to for the scene, with no real through line for the season, or their character, or their behavior and decisions. For this video, I'm going to go through my few positives, and then I'm going to go through the plot and how insane it is when you hear it all back to back. I think a lot of people overlook stuff when you just watch it once a week. I'm going to go through each relevant character and talk about how erratic their behavior is, what their arcs seem like they were supposed to be, and really just how much nonsense there was with each character. Then I'm going to go through the world building issues for the big topics. After that, I'm going to discuss a little bit of the meta for this show. The meta stuff is my least favorite thing to talk about, but it seems to have impacted the show quite a bit. The last thing I'm going to do is go through the show as it is and just point out simple things that could have improved the story without completely overhauling it. Since I've spent so much time criticizing it, I want to make my own suggestions. I'm going to put timestamps all throughout the descriptions because this is going to be a pretty lengthy video. So if there's one particular thing you're interested in, you can just click to it. My positives for this season are Joseph Morgan. He's a very good actor that they completely wasted on an idiot character. The visuals for how low the budget are when they actually do show stuff are okay. The Spartan armor looks good. Most of the acting is good. I think Perez and Ackerson in particular are probably the best. And I think every plotline, character-wise at least, had the bare bones of a good idea, but the execution and logistics are just a nightmare. So those are my positives for this season. Alright, so let's get into the plot. The way that I'm going to do this, because the show jumps around so much each episode, is focus on the main plot threads by character. So for example, I'll cover John's plot line, then Ackerson's, then Parangosky's, then Kai's or Soren's or whoever. And that way it should be a little bit easier to follow, because the show jumps back and forth from plot line to plot line. Probably less than 5 minutes every episode, and it really muddies it up. Alright, let's start with episode 1. And this is the one where all the normies are given false hope based on what they heard before the season came out and the trailer.
First time.
Let's start with Master Cheeks. To start the show, we see Cortana being brain drained magically from Jimmy Halo. I'm not a huge fan of throwaway lines, but it would have been nice to see this addressed. A simple line like, "Hey Cortana, we developed a chip that you can transfer yourself to. Transfer yourself to this chip since he's dead so we can bring him back." But we get nothing. I mean, that might have actually required some effort. Just to be clear, he literally dies and gets hit like 50 feet with a gravity hammer, and then goes on to fight for however many minutes, plus however long it took to get medical attention, and somehow they just resurrected him because he's Jesus Rings. And then we go straight to Sanctuary, where the Spartans, literally the most valuable resource in the UNSC, are helping civilians evacuate outer colonies and get to Pelicans, because obviously no one else could do that. And for the Halo copers that want to make arguments like, oh, well, they don't actually trust the unpeloted Spartans, they try to kill them later this season. There's supposedly a Covenant war raging across the galaxy right now.
Were it not for the Arbiter's council, I would have glassed your entire planet.
Worst case, they die, and that gets rid of the problem while taking out a shitload of Covenant. But instead, they had to be moronic about it. There's a really funny little scene in here where Cheeks says that he'll go get the Marines, and the guy says no, and someone else has to complain before Chief can go. For the rest of the season, he pretty much tells Admiral Ackerson to suck his dick half the time that he talks to him. This show's military hierarchy is just non-existent. Then, against all military tactics and common sense, and because the story needs it, even though this is a babysitting trip according to Vanek, Jeremy goes alone to where the team is missing that they need to find. Vanek makes an Ibex joke because he likes animals. We get the "We Have Halo Music at Home" soundtrack, and he goes into the fog where there's magically no communication. The dialogue is so shit, it's unreal. Vanek is like, "If you don't come back now, you won't make it." And Master Queef says, "Don't wait up," like some generic 80s action hero.
Le who? The her.
As if this makes any sense. Is this a super important time-pressed evac, or is it babysitting? Is this a military operation, or is everyone just doing whatever they want regardless of how much sense it makes? We also get a nice jump start to Kwan's magically retarded plotline, where the magic old lady doesn't want to leave the planet. We see people talk to her who aren't Kwan, so she is real. And the planet gets glassed, and she just keeps reappearing. Oh, we also get no explanation for her. She just references planets 42 years ago and mystical shit, and we're supposed to take this entire plotline seriously. And then because no one has radar, or friend or foe tags, or eyes, the comms team shoots at him poorly. And this is where we meet the real hero of the story, Perez. Suddenly, motion detectors, radar, and flashlights don't exist, so the Covenant picks off the comms team like it's a shitty horror movie. Tribal leader Josiah knows the aliens are close by because of the smell. 500 years in the future, we're relying on smell to detect enemies that are right next to you.
I'll point it at Jupiter.
We get a little bit of decent choreography here of him messing up some elites. Thank Christ they aren't sentient and they just attack one at a time and with no guns. It's a really good thing they're not a super advanced alien species that wants to genocide all the humans. And the only one who successfully attacks him runs up with no weapon and just grabs him for a suplex. If the elite had a sword, Cheeks would have been skewered like one of P. Diddy's rappers. Luckily for us all, Perez is the lone survivor, so she can have the most retarded shoehorned plotline I've ever seen. Here's where we get the reveal that they're actually surrounded by dozens of Covenant. You know, the Lord of the Glutes, who they know is a blessed one, who they call a demon. Yeah, him. They just surround him in crazy numbers and then let him walk away because it looks cool. They take turns lighting their swords one at a time. You'd think they were at a fucking concert.
The answer!
And we find out that his girlfriend Makee is alive, presumably because they didn't have any money, so they brought her back for another season. How'd she live after getting shot in the chest? You know, off-screen, as all important things are. So then the planet just suddenly starts getting glassed. I guess the Covenant ships just showed up out of nowhere, or they waited till the absolute last second to risk the Spartans' lives and the soldiers' lives. And you know, this really important evac that you're sending all these resources to try to save civilians. Fuck it. Just don't use radar. Don't look up and see ships in space. Don't have a real escape plan. Just use some condors and ask people nicely to leave. Hang out and get glassed. Fuck it. They go back and meet with Keyes, and he says everything in the outer colonies is getting glassed, including Madrigal. Unfortunately for us all, Kwan wasn't there. Then we get one of the dumbest lines of dialogue I've seen in the entire show. Ackerson gets introduced, and John is alone, insisting that the Covenant invaded before they glassed to, quote, practice invasions of a planet.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
What does this mean? An alien force called the Covenant that has existed for millennia, that was literally formed by conquering other species, doesn't know how to perform a ground invasion, so they have to practice? Okay. I mean, what are we doing here? Oh, goodness. Ackerson talks about Halsey and uses was instead of is, implying that she's dead. So you know right away he's evil. And for some reason, none of the Spartans realize he's their boss, so they don't bother saluting, they don't call him sir. They're just kind of dicks to him. I guess Ackerson thought he was on that undercover boss show and thought it'd be fun just to pop into a meeting. Perez's plotline is tied to Cheeks at first, so I'm just gonna lump them together. Perez gets credit for what Jason Eclipse did while they were simultaneously using King of Posterior's image as propaganda all over the military and television. Why give the guy that you want to be an icon and unkillable legend credit for the shit that he's actually done? Makes sense to not do it. Jude Sphere storms into a meeting and confronts Ackerson completely inappropriately. He goes and talks to Admiral Parangosky, who's gone undercover for literally zero reason. When she can order anyone to do anything, she's the most powerful person in Oni, and she's pretending to be undercover just because.
But I don't want to be a pirate!
She could have John held in a cell. She could have him tortured or shipped off to wherever he'd be useful. This is all so incredibly retarded, I don't know how she got made Admiral. And then we get this weird scene where I'm not even sure what the point is, of Jason Oblong hanging out in virtual strip clubs, reminiscing about Cortana, where he's apparently a regular. Him and Cortana hated each other in season 1, and now he misses her, but it doesn't really come up again this season until she can magically operate an entire UNSC base on Onyx from a Covenant ship system. And that's it for him and Perez for episode 1. Let's go over Kai and Vanek's brief introduction in this episode. Kai and Vanek are pretty briefly introduced this episode. We don't see much of them. We get wonderful exposition conversation between the two, where she asks very specifically how he feels since he removed his pellet 3 weeks ago. The show thinks it's really clever that his personality is, "Durr, I like animals." He's like the fucking water boy in Mjolnir. These are the same type of shallow cunts that think the color or type of your genitalia, or where you stick them, is a personality trait. Absolute fucking losers. But that's really it for these two for episode 1. Let's go on to Ackerson and Parangosky for episode 1. So I already briefly touched on it, but Parangosky's plotline is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. And I'm including like Supernatural, where people go in and out of hell like there's just an elevator down to it. I have no idea how people thought this was clever. I have no idea how all the writers thought this was a good idea. In this scene, Ackerson begins the process of gaslighting John into thinking that he's crazy because he had Cortana fill his body and then brain drained. The plan here, just so we're clear, is for Parangosky, the most powerful person in Oni, which she says herself later, is to have Ackerson lie to Chief, try to drive him crazy, so that when they need the Spartans later, him and his team are dead, along with the other Spartan IIs.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
They let him go hang out at AI strip clubs. They don't arrest him. They let him meet face to face with Parangosky, quote unquote, undercover, and just walk away. They give him free reign when they suddenly decide they want their most valuable resource dead. Absolute stupidity. That's the main points of Ackerson and Parangosky in episode 1. Let's move on to Soren, whose entire plotline is just a waste of time this season. Soren's plotline starts about 20 minutes into the episode after we get plenty of Jebediah in his armor. We're back to the place that everyone totally cares about and wanted to see again, the rubble. Soren and Laera, his wife, are watching the refugees come in, and after they hold a public cringe fest, they take some in as indentured servants, but for some reason they prefer criminals over normal people. And Fat Dave Chappelle, being the Pirate King, falls for one of the dumbest traps ever and is deceived by a leprechaun who actually works for the UNSC, so we can ensure that bad bitch Laera is in charge. We get this dumbass stuff where Soren suddenly wants to be a Spartan again, even though he's happy in season 1 and has a family. That's what this episode sets up for those two. And the last one for episode 1 is Kwan. Right now she's in her Obi-Wan Kenobi mode, but soon here she'll be in Kwan Wick mode. And she's not actually in this episode except for this last part, but her retarded ass arc started with the old lady that we see that's magical in Sanctuary. We know that she's real because she talks to Marines and Chief, and the episode ends with Obi-Kwan narrating. Everyone's favorite character, who everyone totally wanted back, and is made even more important now.
Why do you do it?
This is jumping ahead, but it's funny because her existence, along with about a dozen contrivances, is what allows the Flood to come back. She's also somehow so close that she's hanging out with Kessler, and it almost seems like she's in a part of their house, but she's also an indentured servant somewhere. Make of that what you will. Let's get into episode 2. This is where people figure out what the show actually is. Shit. I'm going to start with Halsey and Ackerson for this one, because not much happens with them character-wise or plot-wise, even though they take up a lot of screen time. This episode sets up Halsey's plot, which is just kind of whatever convenience the show needs to happen. She doesn't actually do much. She just kind of moves from place to place. And this also confirms Ackerson is a total psychopath because he keeps creating flash clones of his dead sister who was taken by the Spartan II program and sending them in to torment Halsey. I'm not sure why the UNSC is funding this. I'm not sure why he'd ever be allowed to get to this level of knowing his sister was in the Spartan II program. I'm not sure why, even if he is an admiral, he'd have access to that information. We also find out that he knows where Cortana has been sealed away. This is the type of shit that makes Ackerson completely evil and ruins his entire arc when the show wants you to think later on, oh, he's not really that bad. It was actually Parangosky who's evil. Again, no idea whose decision this was to make him completely evil the first 4 episodes and then try to give him a redemption. Later on in the episode, Ackerson meets with Crazy Eyes Kai, and this is where he continues his evil arc, and we start her arc where she's a completely useless leader.
It was simply a matter of outsmarting them. I sent wave after wave of my own men at them until they reached their limit and shut down.
Kai's arc after this point is get mad at John for lying and then leave the Spartan 3 program for like 2 weeks after Reach falls. But she doesn't actually train the Spartan 3s, they just train the simulator. And then when push comes to shove, she chooses them over her lifelong friend and Spartan, Jonah Revolution. Another terrible arc. With Halsey and Ackerson and Kai out of the way, let's move on to our main man. After throwing a tantrum, Jack Hoop threatens to go above Ackerson's head, and he says, I am the ONI, like he's a shittier version of Palpatine, and again reinforces that he is evil, so that his redemption arc makes no sense. This is also where we get the arc of being more than just the Mjolnir armor, before he proceeds to get his ass kicked in every fight for the rest of the season, until he has his armor. Kai reminds him that she shot Makee herself, and Makee is dead. Julian Sphere is being a total dick to Riz in training because the war that has presumably been going on for years, possibly decades, is now a serious issue. It wasn't before though. And then for whatever reason, Jesse's circlet has access to everything as part of the plan to drive him crazy and let him interfere with stuff, again, instead of just arresting him or executing him so that he gets pissed off about Cobalt Team. As is appropriate for all coworkers, Baron Buttocks goes to visit Perez at her house completely inappropriately, and her ludicrous arc really begins. To be clear, her arc is comm specialist, PTSD soldier, Sangheili translator, family killed PTSD soldier, kind of attached to John in a maybe romantic way, pilot who leaves Keys to sacrifice himself instead of doing it herself, the best Spartan 3 in a week, and then guilt-tripping Monarch rear end into saving her and Kai instead of going to Halo, and she survives.
He is the chosen one.
Her and Kwan are the self-insert characters. Speaking of, let's go back to Kwan Wick, or we have Lucy Liu at Home's plotline. She's an indentured servant who somehow gets to hang out with Kessler. Thank Christ there isn't sophisticated technology in this world, and they use ear tags like they're cattle, so she just rips it out when she needs to. I'm calling her Kwan Wick because she just kills multiple bounty hunters off by herself. This shit is insane. There's not much to say about Dave Chappelle in this one. He gets taken, and Laera gets betrayed by the other pirates who want the Black Pearl. And I saved the worst for last, which is Riz. This shitty and short arc for her starts now, where she's injured somehow 6 months later. A plasma grenade that she survived is more of an issue than Jasper Disc being literally fucking brain dead. Not to mention she was wearing armor, which we've seen at this point is pretty much indestructible and magic, and can survive 2 ships colliding at the end of the season. Riz is training while injured, which apparently we have no technology for or doctors to detect injuries and whether or not she's actually fit for duty. At this point, she goes and talks to gay ginger Stevie Wonder and has a midlife crisis. Don't worry, this arc doesn't actually go anywhere. I guess her biological clock that Spartans don't have is ticking, because soon she decides, fuck being a Spartan, I want to raise some kids. Riz goes and meets with the retired Spartan Daredevil, and in a horrific display of world building, we find out that he just went blind. 500 years in the future where they created superhumans and have interstellar technology. Can't replace eyes. She gets some ancient Chinese treatment and a little bit of believe in yourself magic, and I guess she's healing.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
The episode ends when we get more confirmation that the show is both poor and retarded, when a military guy sends in groups of 4 to die in the dark, and everyone's second favorite character behind Obi-Kwan, Makee, aka Doc Brown, shows up.
Great Scott!
And that's episode 2. Moving on to episode 3. This is the episode where we get to the drama that you should have saved for your mama. Let's start with our store brand John Halo. Monarch Heine takes his team on an illegal mission until he runs into Megan Rapinoe and she shuts him down. Why is she such an evil cunt?
Don't know.
Does she have an arc or some kind of crazy death? Nah, she's just there to be an asshole. Prince Buns goes back to base and the Wish version of Sergeant Johnson puts him in timeout. They were already in timeout, and thank God the UNSC doesn't have prison cells or executions or any other way to limit what people do, so nothing actually changes except he pouts more. Thank God he's a superhuman and beats up the only 2 guys they sent to escort him and escapes the most important military base we have with no resistance. And a little bit later on, he figures out Parangosky's still with Oni. Why is she undercover? Because she wanted to LARP a little bit, I guess. I don't know. Jackson Perimeter once again visits Perez in her home, once again stalking her, totally appropriate, and it completely makes sense that the UNSC who wants him dead and thinks he's out of control would just allow this behavior to continue. And that's pretty much it for him this episode. Let's move on to Kai. Kai also has a really short part this episode. She bleeded in the cheeks, but now she's on board with Ackerson because she wants to steal Kurt's job from the book Ghost of Onyx. But she doesn't actually do the job. She just kind of exists there for a couple weeks. So that's it for her. Let's move on to Ackerson for episode 3. We're supposed to feel bad for Ackerson because his dad has dementia, but he's evil as fuck and they're about to abandon Reach, so...
Boo-hoo. Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
I guess this works to make you sad if you also have dementia and forget how evil he is to the Spartans and everybody else. In a vacuum, the scene's fine. It does nothing for me here because he's already been too much of a dick. Cobalt gets an off-screen death. They were kind of ass clowns though.
Suck big ass cream.
So who really cares? And they had like 30 seconds of screen time. It turns out that the Chiefs were clapping. He was right. So Keys tells Ackerson to fuck himself because they're about to abandon Reach. Just to be clear about the UNSC's plan. The plan here is to abandon Reach, all of its people, the most important military base they have, Cortana, one of the Forerunner artifacts. They deliberately want to kill the Spartan IIs. And all of this is in the hope that maybe one of the Spartan IIIs which are just inexperienced soldiers in white armor, can put a spike in a Covenant ship and take out a bunch of their ships or a solar system. They have to hope that Cortana gets taken but not destroyed and can still communicate what will hopefully be useful information that will somehow lead to victory. This is the master plan of the UNSC.
Are you fucking retarded? The hell's the matter with you?
I already mentioned this, but we get more of the undercover Admiral Curry shit where she tells John go back to the military instead of, literally fucking ordering him to do it or having him arrested. We go back to Ackerson and Halsey, where really they both just reinforce that they're evil as shit and they're trying to psychologically torture each other, and then Ackerson gives her to Soren. As part of his redemption arc. Makes sense. Ackerson goes and tells his dad to kill himself as he abandons him. Let's go to Laera for episode 3, since she has a ridiculous amount of screen time and steals all of Soren's agency throughout the season. So from season 1 to 2, she practically evolves like a Pokemon, from Trophy Wife into Yas Queen Slayer. She tries to fly away with her, Kessler, and Kwan because the crew betrays her, and she gets caught, but manages to beat up 3 people at once somehow, giving time for Kessler to escape. Laera gives Kessler over to Obi-Wan Wick, who's the worst babysitter ever, and ships him off to become a child soldier. This actually works out, because fortunately, this puts everyone on Onyx, because Kessler's going to become a Spartan III, so that all of our characters can meet up again later in the season. Laera is about to get killed, but then we get James Bond levels of monologuing, while Kwan Wick lures the entire crew, literally one by one, into the area where she's at, like a broken video game, killing them all, and as is tradition for the show, it's all off screen. And that's it for them for this episode. And again, last and least, we'll go to Riz. Riz goes to dinner with Fat Daredevil and his husband, and this makes her quit being a Spartan apparently, because we get nothing else from this arc. I guess if people were just a little bit mean to the Spartans and they got one good meal, it would lead to having no more Spartans. Who knew? On to episode 4, The Fall of Reach. You've all been looking forward to it and believing it will be the epic second half of the season.
I was just fucking with him right there,
It's really the fall of a few thousand people in a couple suburbs and a forfeiture of all military assets, like you lost in Monopoly or something, since they didn't really care to fight, and instead of attacking like a scientifically advanced alien force, they attack like terrorists with human bombs spread throughout the city. We'll start with Mr. Cheeks again for this one. Joseph Round and his side piece Perez run through the city, and he fights a Sangheili one-on-one, showing that he doesn't even need the armor, it's just for decoration. Perez cries a bunch about having no training, which turns him on, but in a week, she'll be the best Spartan 3, which is apparently Ackerson's life work. He probably would have had a more impressive life's work if he had just killed himself. They take a little break after he beats up that one elite to go have a quickie in an old thrift shop and to increase the runtime. But hey, we see an Xbox, so all the Halo show simps and possibly bots can go, my god, they put an OG Xbox in the background. I told you guys they love Halo in the games. They also talk about a quarter, which is a pull from the book Fall of Reach, but this show decides to beat it to death and make the quarter symbolic of everything that he does. And this episode can actually be pretty summed up in a bunch of really poorly choreographed fighting with no one in armor, where Daredevil wields a grenade launcher like he actually has sight, his doctor husband dies on the battlefield, so dramatic, and poor gay-blind Spartan decides to walk into a wraith that they could only afford to show for a couple seconds with a bunch of grenades in his hand as a suicide bomber. Jaden Parabola goes on to headquarters and finds out that Ackerson stole their armor, so he doesn't get to become the superhero Tyrant Bums yet. Keyes gives a speech worthy of We Have Sergeant Johnson at Home, and only black significant characters die in this episode, along with the 2 gay ones. It's like they're trying to whittle down their representation. Perez is salty that she gets dumped, and Clappin' Cheeks throws a quarter at her and says it wasn't even worth that much, skank. One of the only logical things that Cheeks says in the show, and he almost acts like John Halo instead of Jimmy Rings, is that Keyes is an admiral and shouldn't be sacrificing himself. But then Keyes explains that they ran out of money for the budget, so he has to die. Thanks to a series of huge coincidences, all our main characters are reunited in a single hallway because the Fall of Reach has a huge scope of one tiny city and a hallway. After like 15 minutes of uncompelling fighting, Keyes gets a death worthy of this show, which is to say absolute shit. Perez, flies off and magically ends up at Onyx as a Spartan 3. How? Who cares? That's the beauty of off-screen. You can just do whatever you want without worrying about pesky things like logic. Jake Curlicue gets fucked in a fight by the Arbiter, but Makee is like, no, I need the Spartan D again. Instead of taking him hostage, they leave him there screaming, no, when Vanek dies because he gets stabbed in the chest with a needle from a needler. It's about as funny as Darth Vader's no at the end of episode 3. And the way that Vanek died with this weird needler around, I guess the needler realized it was time for a dramatic death, so it just chilled until it needed to explode at the right time. That's it for him on this one. Let's move on to Halsey and Soren because they're the other plot line. Halsey and Soren talk, but nothing really matters about their conversation. It's not interesting. What actually matters is that they observe Cortana getting stolen while not dying themselves miraculously. And now that I think about it, the Arbiter definitely has a negative KD due to betrayals when this season ends. Either way, this allows all of our characters to have the huge convenience of all ending up in one place. Halsey and Soren are mainly on a little date of their own because he has a thing for blonde MILFs. They wander through the base as literally the only people there. Makee somehow knows how to take Cortana, who's in a chip now. And the Arbiter lets Halsey and Soren finish their date unscathed. Eventually they're able to see Keys die, and we get that shitty fight to end the episode. So that was the Fall of Reach. On to episode 5. If you remember episode 5 at all, this was the Snooze Fest episode, and also the longest episode of the season. Let's start this one off talking about Jim Bob Rangs. He's been shot with a plasma pistol, just chilling with Soren. They take down the one brute we see this season. And because women rule everything, Laera and the Chosen Kwan show up to this exact hallway because they read the script and knew they needed to avoid the Covenant fleet and come straight here just in the nick of time.
Don't worry. Girls get it done.
Kwan gets a Rambo shot of her using a turret, but rescues them all until Riz decides, wait, I forgot. My nickname is Retard Riz. So she goes back for Vanek's body because Spartans are sentimental in this show. Then she gets shot and goes into a coma. Tsar Keister wakes up from his coma and wants revenge. You know, on the UNSC instead of fighting the Covenant, because it turns out that without his armor, he's actually a loser. Kind of destroys the whole arc they were setting up for the first couple episodes. This whole episode for Jake Curvature is pretty much him supposedly discovering his humanity, but it's all forced by the Chosen Kwan, and nothing really comes of it, except Vanek's body gets burned. He's pretty much the complete same after this episode. Halsey explains to him, but primarily the audience, that what happened on Reach wasn't strategic, it was political. Glad she can make it clear to the audience what the UNSC priorities are. And the majority of the rest of the episode is Jonas Horseshoe having feelings, which he's had literally since episode 2 of season 1. I guess everyone's supposed to forget that he was screaming at people and tried to punch Halsey and grabbed like a homeless crazy looking guy and was like, what am I? Halsey performed surgery on Riz to turn her into Forrest Gump, but says that she can still be a Spartan if she tries hard enough. Let's move on to the Chosen Kwan. This is the episode where she evolves from Kwan Wick into the Chosen Kwan. This also confirms that she's maybe the most important character to the plot. Thank God she became an indentured servant in Kessler's closet and happened to need to go to Reach, where they happened to escape to Onyx, and she happened to fall into a well that was the Forerunner well, where only she could figure out the space puzzle, and that puzzle happened to unleash the flood. Wonderful writing. Yeah, that's kind of it for her this episode. She helps John open up about his feelings, and we're confirmed now that she's just magic. Moving on to Soren and Laera. They're on their pursuit for Kessler, and this show does something really impressive, which is create a child that the audience doesn't care about whether or not you find him.
Impressive. Most impressive.
So they're on Illyria. They talk to the guy that deals in finding homes for people, also known as human trafficking. And Laera remembers that she's a sudden girl boss and goes off on Soren about how he's supposed to feel, as you do in a healthy relationship. But then she gets mad that the carpet doesn't match the drapes and rips her blonde wig off, so we understand she's a different lady now. Laera then becomes someone who watched way too much Walking Dead and pretends to be Negan. And after they find out the first place they went wasn't actually Kessler, she intimidates the guy and finds out that Kessler is conveniently on Onyx, along with Ackerson, Parangosky, Kai, the magic Forerunner well that the Chosen Kwan needs, and everyone else who matters. They realize that the kid isn't in Illyria, and we've wasted a whole episode. Let's move on to Makee's arc, because her arc actually starts here with any kind of depth, if you can call it that. So Makee's arc pretty much makes no sense the entire time. We see her crying about Reach, as if she didn't know she was part of a group that was waging a jihad on humanity, and her entire goal, which she states, is to activate Halo and cleanse the galaxy and start over, because both humans and the Covenant suck. And we get this really stupid dynamic where Makee is ordering the Arbiter around, but then the elites are all like, you live because we let you. It doesn't even make sense why they keep threatening to kill her. As far as we know, the only other blessed one is her Spartan boyfriend. So if they kill her, they can't use any Forerunner shit, and this whole thing just makes no sense. And this plot, with pretty much no depth from her end, drags out for the rest of the season. Now that she has Cortana, they bond because they've both seen Emperor Fanny's ass and won his dong. Makee freaks out about High Charity, even though they presumably can't harm her since she's the only blessed one they have, and they literally need her for their great journey. But whatever. Arbiter agrees to trust her because she says that she's located the Halo, like the Ohio State, and Cortana projects a hologram of it. She looks so insane that I'm not sure who would trust her when she looks like this, but whatever. And that's kind of it for her for this episode. And last but least, again, is Riz, and then she's gone. Riz finishes her arc, which is pretty much just a flat line, where she kind of meanders from point A to B with no reason. She wakes up, realizes she's Forrest Gump, gets yelled at by Soren Laera to stand up to reinforce that he's just a total asshole and a terrible leader. And for some reason, he's the protagonist we're supposed to root for. She says, "Eat shit, my biological clock is ticking, I'm going to play mama for the kids." And that's it. She just goes. And I said Riz was last, but we actually end on Kai because she's replacing Kurt in the dumbest way possible. And that's it for episode 5, the longest, most boring episode of the season. On to episode 6. Episode 6 is funny because the whole main cast is like, oh, thank God we had all these coincidences to end up on Onyx together, and then they all go their separate ways. So for this episode, I'm going to start with Perez because it's funny. So I Have No Training Perez is the best Spartan 3 after a week. Whatever budget they had, instead of using it for the main story, they used for their own original character, just like the fans asked for. They run a simulation test with random shots and no covenant because that's good training. And Kai is their leader now and essentially just narrates what they're doing but doesn't actually lead shit. Great arc for her. And as an aside, Perez literally just came from Reach and we see Kai feel guilty about Reach, so she should know that her former Spartan leader that she trusted was correct and not crazy. They run the simulation again. Perez figures out it's a suicide mission, and Kai seemingly knows as well, but trusts Ackerson enough that she's going to beat Jamal Cheek's ass later in this episode. So let's go to Lord Queef and Kai next. Joel Helix beats up a bunch of guys without killing them, lets himself get arrested, they don't shoot on sight. They arrest him, and then decide to shoot on sight later, even though he's never been questioned. So pretty much he's just wearing plot armor for this episode to get from point A to B to C. We get a generic Captain America scene where Megan Rapinoe taunts Jimmy, and he says, "I'll never watch women's soccer no matter how mean you are to me." And then because they don't have him in handcuffs, they have him on leashes for some reason. He just whips everybody around, beats their asses. Wonderful security job at the top secret UNSC base on Onyx. And then he literally just wanders around the base unimpeded. Ackerson confirms the existence of Makee and the fact that Reach fell showed that John was telling the truth. So Kai says that she trusts him. And she's also supposed to be feeling guilty about Silver Team being dead, and then proceeds to kick the ever-living shit out of Jonas Swerve, again, when he was proven to be telling the truth about everything. And then despite all this guilt, she's going to prioritize the Spartan 3s later anyway. Great arc for her too. Everyone with Goldfish memory pretends that he didn't hold his own against Vanek and Riz last season when they were both in armor.
Serval's on spec. Take out his knee. Riz, 6 o'clock.
So they try to justify this scene as he's just giving up because she has armor. So he lets Kai kick the shit out of him. The armor is really just whatever it needs to be. It's about as magical as Thor's Mjolnir. Cortana, because she's magic and can operate a UNSC base from a Covenant spaceship who knows how far away, realizes now is her chance to cuck Makee because she isn't around. So Cortana hopes that she can wake up Joel Radius with Morning Wood. I mean, she's honestly almost as magical as the Chosen Kwan and literally runs the entire base from who knows where on this Covenant ship and guides him to Ackerson and his suit. Kai goes and argues with Ackerson and claims that she trusts Jace, even though she just fucking pummeled him to near death. Why'd she do that? Who knows? I guess it was allegedly an emotional scene. Let's move on to Kwan's part. She just wanders off and falls into a Forerunner well, and luckily Halsey is just waiting at the bottom for her. Halsey and Miranda eventually find Kwan, and of course, Miranda is smarter than Halsey and figuring out things that she couldn't, because fucking boomers, am I right? That's pretty much it for Kwan this episode and Halsey. So let's go on to Parangosky. In this one, she continues being a bizarre character. Her cycle of stupidity continues, where she now says, "Oh, by the way, I'm the boss," as if everyone didn't already know that. And her genius remains unparalleled when she says that they need 1,000,000 men to replace a single Spartan 2. Maybe you shouldn't have gaslit and tried to kill them repeatedly then, you fucking jackass.
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
Wait till I get going. Where was I?
Moving on to Soren and Laera, who have hardly any time. They just walk into the Spartan 3 training area, because their plan is to just grab Kessler and roll out. And then suddenly Soren decides to become the stereotype of a black father and wants to abandon his kid before Laera yells at him. Best thing she does all season. And the last one, but probably not the least, is the Arbiter. The Arbiter decides to trust Makee and leave High Charity and pisses off his crew. And now he has to defend his ship from mutiny, and Makee decides that her and Autocrat Tushy had the best timing in the world because they're about to grab the magical Forerunner artifact at the same time. And that's it for episode 6. Just a complete cluster. On to 7. Episode 7's a doozy, so we had to start with the MC for this one, which unfortunately either means main character or Master Cheeks because Master Chief is nowhere in sight. We start with another date on Halo with Job and Makee, where she says she loves foot-long wieners, and he says that her clam is the only seafood that he'll eat. Good times. The Wi-Fi is so bad that the Forerunner Skype call drops, and the magical device knocks out only who it needs to, on his end but not hers for some reason. He has a great line too where he blames her for Reach, and she says that's war, as if it's not her side that wants to do the genocide. Whatever.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
He wanders around the base, and Megan Rapinoe goes to shoot Judah Incurvation, but her soldiers are like, oh fuck, he's wearing plot armor, and women's soccer still sucks balls, so they don't do it. And then Kai knocks her out, and she just doesn't show up again. Satisfactory antagonist right there. Jethro Contour immediately goes back on his supposed development and tells Kai, yeah, it sucks, but sacrifices had to be made. He gets his armor, and we get hero music, as he becomes full-blown Master Cheeks, with no helmet still. The scorned lover, Perez, is reunited with Jordan Loop, and inspires him to save people instead of prioritizing the mission, and gives him his coin back, which is how he makes all decisions or something. He realizes that he doesn't want her to die, because when he goes to the Halo ring with Makee and Cortana, he's going to need a side piece and someone to help repopulate the ring faster. And that's it for him for this episode. Let's move on to Parangosky and Ackerson, since they're pretty much tied together in this one. This may be the dumbest episode for Parangosky, which is pretty impressive since I think I've said it every episode. Parangosky tells Ackerson to his face that she's going to throw him under the bus. You know, as all good undercover spies who are about to betray somebody do. They give him fair warning. The big fleet is coming for Onyx, you know, so we end up with an identical situation to Reach, which they just totally abandoned. And Parangosky just sends Condors to die one after another against the Covenant fleet. Great use of resources and tactics. Thank God they didn't try to defend Reach. And here we get what I would argue is the dumbest thing in the show, where Ackerson runs the simulation for this spike they have to blow up a Covenant ship. The spike is supposed to incinerate the solar system, including Halo, but then later on Ackerson specifically says it has a 1,000,000-mile radius. Just to give everyone some perspective, our moon is 240,000 miles away. These idiots wanted to create a doomsday device and don't even understand scale. And they're so fucking retarded they created a doomsday device.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
That's mainly it for Ackerson for this one, and Parangosky. Let's move on to Makee. Makee manages to outrun the Sangheili priest without armor, and then kills him. So again, how useful is the armor really? Arbiter fought off the infidels, and Makee puts the mark of shame on herself to join him. And that's it for this one for her. Let's go to the Miranda, Halsey, Obi-Kwan plot, which is hilarious. Halsey and Miranda have been working on this for years, and Halsey's been working on it literally since before Miranda was born, apparently. And Kwan figures it out in about 5 minutes because she's magic. What's even funnier is why did the Forerunner set this door up this way? They get the door open, walk into the lab, and then the lab collapses in on itself and destroys itself. Like, what kind of wannabe Indiana Jones shit is this? If the Forerunners didn't want the lab open, just blow it up yourselves. And this massive series of coincidences is what causes the flood to be let loose. So ridiculous to just waste a massive twist like that. Halsey and Miranda are talking. Miranda pops open the flood USB, blows a load in her pants.
Oh.
Halsey is suddenly Batman and just vanishes to the command center. And while in the command center next episode, she pretty much has to look right at the camera and tell the audience, I'm not arrested because this show doesn't make any sense, but it's cool, don't worry about it. Parangosky is mad at Ackerson for doing his job and knowing what the spike does. Another win for Parangosky. So he gets arrested for this. I'm going to go on to Soren and Laera because they don't have much time this one. Soren suddenly reminisces about being a child soldier, and Laera is like, hey you retard, that's our son. Best point she's made all season. Soren uses his masturbation arm to beat up the guards and protect his son, but Laera and Kessler get arrested and go to jail. I guess he just walks away from the secret military base. These two and Ackerson are the only motherfuckers dumb enough to let the UNSC actually arrest them, because everyone else in the show is just invincible. Moving on to Perez last. She doesn't do much this episode either. She has to calm down the more experienced Spartan IIIs because one is crying. And like I mentioned before, she's now an inspiration for John because Kwan and Perez are his motivations. Halsey says outright that Kwan motivated John to change. He doesn't really seem to have his own motivation beyond uncontrollable rage, unless it comes from Kwan, Perez, or Makee. Wonderful. The episode ends and we actually see Halo. Took 16 episodes, but there it is. The incompetence to make the Halo ring a short slip space jump away, and the entire Covenant fleet is there, but they're not actually trying to land on their holy ring. They just chill in space fighting humans. They actually mentioned in the show that they scanned a gravitational anomaly in this area, and I guess they just never bothered to look through a fucking telescope at it, or send anyone to go check it out. Insane. Anyway, we're on to the finale. Episode 8 is the equivalent of when you've had too much to drink, you have sex for like an hour, can't bust a nut because you're too drunk, and then just give up and go to sleep tired.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
I'm saving Cheeks for last this episode, since he's the one who ends the season. We can start with the Kwan, Soren, Kessler, Laera, Ackerson part. We get a person who's presumably a PhD in biology, professional lab researcher, and too dumb to not spread the flood virus with some cringe-ass pop song. And if you're a show-only person, I guess you just think there's zombies in Halo now. Obi-Kwan's force sensitivity grows stronger, and she can sense the flood and shit with Soren, so she goes to help rescue Laera and Kessler, and for some unknown reason, Ackerson. You know, the guy who wanted to kill the Spartans, abandon Reach, and kidnapped Kessler for his program to make him into a Spartan III in the first place. Obviously worth saving. Even here, the way that he says hi to Laera and Kessler, he just looks evil as shit and villainous. Soren and Kwan have no real reaction to all these people that are frozen, even though it's weird as shit. And they kill some extras from the Last of Us TV show and head on out. Obi-Kwan is surrounded by the flood zombies, but she's grown strong in the Force and is now a Jedi Master, so the old lady is able to hold them back or something. It's not really clear. They're going to escape. Laera stays behind because she's infected, and everyone clapped because this death is a happy moment for the series instead of a sad one. Great writing. The flood runs wild in the command center, and I guess they didn't have the budget because Parangosky just kind of gets dry humped to death. Anyway, Halsey escapes, she's infected, Miranda puts her in cryo, and Miranda is now alone surrounded by flood, but says she'll cure the flood, which I have no doubt that she will if there's a season 3. I'm also assuming she'll off-screen teleport to escape the situation. We see that spores infect everyone but our main characters. I guess their plot armor is also effective against disease, and I guess that's why they're the only ones who are alright. Let's move on to Kai and Perez next, since they're kind of tied together. Just like they practiced in the simulations, only Kai, Perez, and the chick whose name I can't be bothered to remember make it to the ship. They make it to the command center, but they're kind of stuck, and Perez is wounded. So Jericho Meniscus flips his coin and goes to save Kai and Perez because he wants more bitches for his space equivalent of Noah's Ark. This scene is also funny because Parangosky must be senile. She tries to start to give him orders again, and then has surprise Pikachu face when he says eat shit. I think we get more suit time with Perez and Kai than we do with him as they fight the Covenant, and she uses double needlers. He does finally show up and act like John Halo, killing Covenant, saving Spartans, and completing missions. Kai says that she'll stay behind for the obviously predictable self-sacrifice, with a horrible one-liner of this is gonna hurt. And it's not even actually a self-sacrifice, because apparently her armor is invincible, and it's really a matter of whether or not her contract gets renewed if she's alive or dead. She doesn't even use the spike so that they can use it next season to blow up Halo if the show gets renewed. Somehow crashing 2 ships together in a relatively small explosion turns the tide of the battle.
Alrighty then.
Perez lives, and her arc just kind of ends as Kai explodes, but not really. So let's get on to the main man and his wife. Makee destroys Cortana's ship because she doesn't want mating competition on Halo, and her ship is getting shot at by the Covenant, even though she is the blessed one that they need to get to Halo to start the fucking great journey. Holy shit, this plotline is stupid. We get a really weird flash forward of Sultan Gluteus Maximus talking to a really bored sounding person that's actually supposed to be a monitor. And at the end, his helmet is half broken. So the next season, he has an excuse to not wear it if the show gets to season 3. So after the stuff that I already covered where he saves his 2 side pieces, Kai and Perez, we get more world-breaking retardation where the Spartan's little suit propeller flies faster than Covenant ships because Homeboy here catches up to Makee's ship in like no time in order to get Cortana back. By the way, his relationship with Cortana at this point is that he hated her, didn't trust her. Cortana watched him bone Makee. He was sad and simped over digital strippers who looked like her. She woke him up and helped him get his suit back, and now he desperately needs her. Anyway, he magically catches up to the ship. Halsey openly defies Parangosky, which I guess she's just cool with now, and Chief sneaks onto the ship. He punches the keyboard the way that I want to punch my TV after trying to play the Gears of War 3 boss on Insanity by myself, and Cortana is magically inside his suit or something. She pretty much has no rules. Cortana says, "Hey, we're gonna die, dumbass. It's a crashing ship," and starts counting down to their death. But John's like, "Cortana, you don't know everything. I've got on my plot armor." So of course they crash the ship and he just walks it off. Makee says that she wants to ring in the divorce, and after Jared Coyle throws a tantrum because she took his virginity, he has to fight the Arbiter for his honor and get his woman back. They duel with swords, and it's kind of hilarious because the Arbiter literally just repeatedly lets him live. Like in this shot right here, you can see he tossed his sword away while Chief is laying there, and instead he just punches his helmet over and over instead of just running him through with a sword. I feel like you can almost hear Arby sigh as he read the script. There's also a really funny little thing right here in this shot where some plasma sword like drips off onto the Mjolnir and it's damaged. And this is like 15 minutes after Kai just crashed 2 Covenant ships into each other and her armor is unscathed. Awesome. Eventually, because he keeps letting him live, Arby dies and Makee says that she's going to go to the divorce lawyer known as the Monitor. And if she wins her case, she's going to genocide the entire galaxy and force him to repopulate it with her. Joaquin is like, "I'm tired of sticking my dick in crazy," but ignores the threat and just lets her walk away. And then he also goes to speak to divorce mediator Guilty Spark. We get a super meta line here about how people stole his armor and bent it to their own purpose. It feels like the creators are trying to say fuck you to the audience just one more time. But there you have it. This is an exhibition in bad writing, and it took a big steamy dump on the fans, Vince McMahon style. I guess we can all rejoice and pray the shit gets canceled before they get renewed. And if they get renewed, I'm sure they'll find an excuse to get off Halo and kill the Flood in like 2 episodes because they don't have the budget. And what they really want to get back to is the CW level human drama that everyone loves. Bravo. So that's my season plot review / summary for Halo Season 2. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's pretty evident that if you actually hear all the details at once, even though at once is still like an hour because there's so much shit going on, while simultaneously nothing happens, that you can really understand just how absurd the story is, and the quality is not an improvement from Season 1 in any meaningful way. Now with all that said, that was only part 1. Let's get on to part 2. Part 2, the characters. So every character in the show is wildly inconsistent, makes stupid decisions, and many of them have plot armor until it's convenient. The characters just have wild emotional swings from scene to scene. That way, whatever the director wants to happen to stir up drama can happen, whether or not it makes sense for that character. I refer to this as Kylo Ren syndrome. If you watch the Star Wars sequel trilogy, he's just all over the place as a character. He has no through line. There's no trait about him that's really consistent. It's just whatever needs to happen happens. For the Halo show, because there's a ton of characters, I'm going to limit my discussion to Master Chief, Parangosky, Ackerson, Halsey, Kai, Soren, and Laera as a pair, Kwan, Keyes, Riz, Makee, and the Arbiter. I'll include timestamps in the description for each one, so if there's only one character you care about or one you want to skip, you can just click ahead. So obviously we're going to start with our main man, Jimmy Rings, aka Master Cheeks. Obviously, his character is completely erratic. They waste a lot of time trying to continue this humanization arc, and I'm not sure why, other than to have some crappy drama. His character last season goes from pellet in the spine robot to angry and super erratic to sleeping with Makee. In this season, he starts dead, gets lied to over and over again about something that he knows is true, becomes a wanted fugitive within the UNSC, still seems like he's kind of in love with Makee, knowing she's a genocidal maniac.
I can fix her. It's okay.
Is supposed to have emotions about Vanek, but then refers to him as meat when he's dead. Gives what's supposed to be an emotional speech thanks to Kwan telling him to. Sets out on a revenge quest against Parangosky and Ackerson instead of worrying about the Covenant, which just glassed Reach. For some reason, now trusts and misses Cortana, even though he hated her all last season until she turned him into a zombie. Now that he's supposed to value people more, he tells Kai, tough titties, we need to make sacrifices to win, and then changes his mind because Perez inspires him with a quarter, so he goes to Halo, where he just lets Makee walk away after she says she's going to kill everyone in the galaxy. This doesn't even include the dumb and disrespectful stuff like telling Ackerson to suck it all season. He mostly gets along with Halsey now inexplicably after trying to kill her last season. He's a total dick to Riz after she got injured, and Kai after he lies to her. Bad adaptation aside, his character doesn't really seem to have a through line. He preaches about stopping the Covenant and getting to Halo, but doesn't really take any action towards it until it's convenient for the plot. Most of his energy is spent bitching at the UNSC officials and seeking revenge on them. He just seems like kind of a stupid asshole. Like, yeah, everyone gets frustrated with their boss. Not everyone lies to the people that they're closest to, yells at them for being crippled, and then goes off and commits crimes and just does whatever they want without consequences. He also just straight up stalks Perez to her house multiple times because he didn't like her report. It's insane. There's also just the amount of coincidence that takes place for him to be where he is and be as important as he is. He happened to be a blessed one in a billion. He happened to stumble upon a Forerunner artifact. He happened to get chosen for the Spartan II program, a couple dozen out of tens of billions. He happened to be the one to go to Madrigal and come across another artifact. He happened to run into Makee, and they happened to bone and go to Halo together in their subconscious. He happened to be the one to get Cortana, and he happened to be the first one to get to Halo. This is just a wild series of coincidences instead of cause and effect. This is on top of all the other plot armor. When he talks to Perez, he says, "I know I have plot armor because I've read the script." He says that, "I know when I go into battle, I'll lose people, but it'll never be me." Then she questions if he made the coin come up heads 11 times in a row. It's just lunacy. The plot armor that he has in this season alone is insane. On Sanctuary, the one elite that actually lands a blow suplexes him instead of stabbing him with a sword. He's just allowed to live instead of killed or captured because it looks dramatic and cool, I guess. Parangosky and Ackerson want him dead. Never arrest him, never execute him. He gets shot without armor, point blank with a plasma pistol. Makee saves him again on Reach after saving him on Sanctuary right when he's about to die. Also, instead of kidnapping him, just walks away. On Onyx, the team of soldiers going after him doesn't shoot him on sight, and they just surround him. Even though they never interrogate him, they just decide not to shoot him. He's able just to wander around the base until he runs into Kai, who beats the shit out of him, but no one else comes and finishes him off. He crashes a Covenant ship onto Halo, and Cortana explicitly says, "We're gonna die," and counts down to their death. Just walks it off. The Arbiter in their final duel just lets him live at least twice for drama. This is all just this season. And it's just terrible that this is the version of Cheeks that we get stuck with. I'm going to stop here for John and move on to Parangosky. But he's just perpetually a dick, does whatever he wants, saved by the script. It's a travesty that we couldn't get anything resembling Master Chief beyond the fact that he wears armor sometimes. I want to talk about Parangosky next because she might be the most destroyed character from the lore, which is kind of crazy. In the show last season, she bets on Halsey the whole time, and that just goes away. She's the most important Oni person, but then she decides to pretend to be fired to talk to John. She can literally have him arrested, killed, suspended, whatever, until she gets what she wants. She then decides to kill the Spartan IIs because even though they've removed their pellets and seemingly have no interest or loyalty to Halsey, they use this as a lip service excuse to say the Spartan IIs are crazy suddenly. Then she decides to just abandon Reach, their most important military base and colony, leave Cortana behind, violating the Cole Protocol, and rely on coincidence and luck to hope that Cortana can lead them to the fleet or something, and she just lets them take the Forerunner artifact. All of this for the master plan of fighting them at Onyx so they can send in hundreds of untrained Spartan IIIs on a suicide mission to blow up the entire solar system.
I have a plan.
She even says, "We need 1 million soldiers in order to replace one Spartan II." What the fuck is this plan? Then she just tells Ackerson right to his face, "I'm gonna blame you if this doesn't work out," and then she has surprise Pikachu face when he betrays her. And then in the finale, she tries to order Chief around after spending all season trying to gaslight and kill him before she just dies a lame-ass death of being dry humped to death by the Flood. She's just a retarded character. I don't believe that she could become the Admiral of anything, and certainly not Oni. If anyone is curious, in the books, she's battling for power behind the scenes, working with Admiral Hood, but also has her own secret projects going on, and she's a very ends justify the means type character. Like, she flat out says, "I'll go to hell if it'll save humanity." Like, that's how she is. And the show just makes her out to be a fucking idiot who thinks that she's smart for drama. This is what happens when you let retards write for a character that's supposed to be intelligent, and they're incapable of doing it. Alright, let's move on to Ackerson. Ackerson is another character that suffers from Kylo Ren syndrome. He's cartoonishly evil in the first half of the season, They try to gain sympathy by having his dad be demented and dying, and his sister was killed in the Spartan II program. I don't believe that he ever would have been able to get to the level he is in the military if that was the case. Or if he was, he certainly wouldn't have been in a position where he could have access to those files to know that information. He lies to John over and over and contributes to abandoning Reach and Cortana, and then steals John's armor so that he can't fight as well. At one point in the show, when Parangosky's going to sacrifice the Spartan IIIs, he says that they're his life's work, and Perez is the best one after a week. He's a complete buffoon. He puts Kai in charge of the program, again for a week or two, but really, she just turns on the simulator and says, "Good job or bad job, guys." Again, making her irrelevant and him incompetent. Then, when John finally catches up with him, he folds like a bitch and does exactly what John tells him to. And he's supposed to be redeemed because he told Parangosky to suck it. This is just another unbelievable arc where they want him to have a redemption, but he hasn't done anything to actually earn it, especially considering how evil he was the first half of the season of the show. In the books, he's really political. He's a dick about the Spartan IIs, but he's not an idiot, and he's brave all the way to the end of his life when he's tortured by the Covenant for information and lies to them to protect his brother. And the show just strips away all the nuance and makes him an asshole. Let's move on to everyone's favorite scientist and sometimes villain, Halsey. Halsey was the villain of season 1, but the show kind of wants you to forget that. This season, she just starts off arrested somehow and is being psychologically tortured by Ackerson, but then she also acts like a total bitch to him. She gets hyper emotional over Key's death when she never really cared about him before, and season 1 even shows that. She goes to Onyx, takes charge of the Forerunner shit that Miranda's doing, and then is outsmarted by Kwan because Kwan is just literal magic. And now her and Miranda are suddenly buddies when they had no relationship prior, or at least not a good one. The whole season she just kind of drifts along, happens to be needed for random things, and then unleashes the flood. And then she gets infected and put into cryo. Even when she sees Soren again, he forgives her for not really any real reason other than she says that she let him go and she can also do the surgery for Riz. She just kind of bounces from place to place, and there happens to be a task that she needs to do on hand. She doesn't really have any agency, it feels like, this season. They also do a retcon here that they probably think isn't a big deal that kind of makes her a psychopath. She knew about the Forerunners and their technology before the Spartan program, and she says that she picked the Spartans based on these Forerunner genetic flags. Essentially like she's a mad scientist trying to force evolution in humans. In the original lore, she was supposed to have created the Spartans to fight the insurrectionists because humanity was on the brink of just falling apart in a decades-long war costing billions of lives. And the Covenant just happens to show up once the Spartans are a little bit older. This scene removes any of that gray area and just makes her a complete lunatic. Like in any other story, she would just be the straight-up villain. This also completely screws up the timeline because the idea that the humans wouldn't be more advanced than the Covenant after having Forerunner technology for decades and access to it and trying to decipher it, reverse engineer it. Humans' advantage is that they're innovative and adaptable. That's their advantage over the Covenant. Obviously in the books, she's a really complicated character who's a person who did what they thought was best and it worked out, but is constantly struggling with regret, guilt, and she's also trying to justify that what she did was right and sort of rationalize it to herself so that she can live with herself. The books actually make her a worse person later on, which is why a lot of people dislike the Kilo 5 trilogy. I didn't mind it because I felt like she kind of skated by without being held accountable, but that's a whole other debate. Either way, you can see all the interest and nuance in this character has just been lost in the show. Let's go on to Kai next. Kai's a weird one because you can tell they actually had a decent idea for her arc and it was just horribly done. The arc that they were trying to do seems like she was supposed to be incredibly loyal to John. He lied to her. She feels betrayed and that breaks her loyalty. And then when she realizes that John was right, she sides with him again, but then is also duty bound. Obviously the show doesn't really manage to do any of this. Knowing that Reach fell, which she does, she's in the simulator in the hall that apparently is the only fucking hall on Reach where she's dealing with her guilt. She also has Perez in her unit, who probably could have told her that John was alive. All of this shows that John is right. Ackerson just straight up acknowledges that Makee is alive, again confirming that John was right. The Spartans are supposed to be the best of humanity, not just physically, and she doesn't put it together that John was right the whole time. What makes this even more ridiculous and just plain stupid is that she says that she trusts John and then beats him almost to death anyway. And then what makes it worse is after all this, they reconcile, they're buddies again, she realizes that he wasn't lying. She says that she has to be with the Spartan IIIs because she's their leader, even though she just trained them for a couple weeks in a simulator. and just abandons John, who she's known for her entire life. We also see that she has terrible leadership skills because the threes suck ass. Perez is the best one after a week, and Perez constantly challenges her authority and calls her an idiot and talks about how much bullshit the simulator is, to the point where Kai has to yell at her, "I'm your commanding officer." This reminds me of Tywin making fun of Joffrey in Game of Thrones when he says that any man who has to scream, "I am the king," is no true king. Fighting wise, she doesn't really do shit all season, except for this terrible self-sacrifice attempt where she doesn't even do her job because she was supposed to use the spike. She easily could have said, "Hey everyone, abandon the system, I'm putting the spike in." They go to subspace, boom, she blows it up. Instead, we get a crappy one-liner. Somehow the battle's turned because of 2 ships blowing up, and she's probably alive if she's willing to renew her contract, and this show gets a season 3. Another complete waste of potential for the ideas that they had, and on top of it, they stole Kurt's character from the book Ghost of Onyx. He's awesome in that book, and you should definitely read it. I'm going to go through Soren and Laera next because they take up so much damn screen time. His character this season is just crazy. He was Pirate King last season, and then falls for the super obvious bait in episode 1 after being kind of a dick to his son and wife. And I'm not even sure what this bait was supposed to be. They show up and it's just like space debris. And the kid's like, "Oh yeah, Halsey's right there." And he just walks on in. He sees Halsey, where they're both in prison. And then all of a sudden he's like, I kind of miss being a Spartan even though I had a family and was happy at the rubble. After this meandering bullshit all season where they're looking for his son, he finally finds him in the Spartan 3 program. And then all of a sudden he's like, nah, getting the shit beat out of him with batons is good for him. Until Laera's like, "Hey, retard, that's our son." And then he's like, "Oh yeah, good point." His character is another one who doesn't seem to have any agency this season. He gets dragged around as a prisoner and then by Halsey and then by Laera. He's another one who just kind of goes from place to place. I didn't really like him in season 1, but he was at least interesting and there was potential there. They completely wasted the actor, just like they did with Ackerson. And then his end to the season, now that Laera is dead, thank God, is him with Kwan, Kessler, and Ackerson. We don't even know where they're going, and they just happen to end up together. He also fights alongside Chief on Reach and beats up a bunch of guards of the Spartan 3 program on Onyx, like he doesn't even have a masturbation arm. He's another one who it seems like they didn't know what to do with, so they just kind of put him all over the place and gave him shit to do without any real meaning behind it or thought. Laera is maybe the weirdest character because she went from pretty much irrelevant trophy wife last season to annoying bitch this season. Suddenly she can beat up some of Soren's crew, she can fly a ship into a war zone and rescue the Spartans and her husband. Then when they're looking for Kessler, she yells at Soren and tells him that he's not feeling the way that she wants him to and makes their relationship seem super fucking toxic. She also lectures him about running away from the Spartan program where he was a kidnapped child soldier in a bizarre rant. And then as part of a rant, she rips off her wig so you know she's changed. Then all of a sudden, she's a badass threatening this guy who deals in human trafficking and says that Soren has to stay outside because he's too squeamish for it. And then at the end of the season, she's the one who makes the self-sacrifice, not intentionally because she got infected by the flood, but still, she's the one who stays behind. To me, her entire character just seems like some kind of self-insert girl boss bullshit. And even if it wasn't self-insert bullshit, which I think it was, her character is annoying every time she's on screen to the point where when she dies, I'm just like, all right then. I can't imagine anyone being sad about her death because she sucks so bad. The same way that I can't imagine anyone gave a shit when they found Kessler. He's not really a character. He's just kind of there, which is pretty amazing to have a child character get kidnapped and your emotional response is like, I wish we had less screen time on this. Oh man. Let's move on to Kwan because she doesn't have as much screen time this season, but she actually might be the most important character in the show now. I feel pretty comfortable saying that the decisions made on Kwan, as far as the show goes from a meta perspective, are easily the worst ones. Last season, she was an annoying, rebellious teen, and then this one, she's an indentured servant badass. Then she's just magic. Then she outsmarts Miranda and Halsey, and she can also hold the flood back and inspire Chief to be better, and that's straight from Halsey's mouth. She saves the Spartans, Halsey, and Soren with Laera, and she's the one who got Kessler shipped off to the Spartan 3 program to begin with, but never gets blamed for it. She doesn't really have much personality. She's just kind of a walking MacGuffin. Thank God they listened to the fans about how much they found her character annoying, and instead of killing her all for reducing her time, they made her the most important character. This is the kind of thing that just feels like a real fuck you to the fans. There's not even that much to actually say about her, because she doesn't say much unless it's just exposition or some kind of magic bullshit where she's moving the plot along around everyone else without them even knowing. Like, she's the key to the flood being unleashed. I want to talk about Keyes briefly. He really didn't have much to do this season. He's kind of Ackerson's bitch until he says go fuck yourself, which is completely out of character, completely unprofessional. And then he chooses to sacrifice himself instead of one of the grunts, which is what a smart admiral or a tactical admiral would do. Maybe they couldn't afford the actor for the whole season. I kind of just wanted to mention him because they wasted his character and the actor. The actor was actually just in the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, and it was nice to see him allowed to be charismatic and have something to do, even if that movie wasn't great. This show just really didn't give him much to do at all. He's just kind of there. Another waste, both of a character from the lore and an actor. I'm going to move on to Riz. Also don't have too much to say about her, Makee, or the Arbiter, but they're important, so I wanted to at least mention them. Riz's arc is one of the most uninspired things I've ever fucking seen. She goes from still being hurt 6 months later, ignoring that John was literally brought back from the dead after at least minutes, possibly hours, but her injuries are still bothering her. She decides that she's tired of being a Spartan and retires. Usually when you go this route, the character discovers something they actually care about doing, there's something they regret missing out on, but they don't do that in this show. Riz says that she's proud of being a Spartan and wouldn't know what to do with her life if she wasn't. But then John yells at her. She has one sit-down dinner with the gay blind guy and his husband, and then she's like, nah, I'm done. And it could have been an interesting arc. They just don't do anything with her. Seriously, how hard would it be for her to use that time off to go on a day out and just have fun and do things that she's either not normally doing or she's doing them for military purposes so she doesn't get to enjoy them. And you can play your little happy music and have her have that moment where she's kind of questioning what she's doing with her life. They don't do any of that. They give her like half an hour of screen time and 2 personality traits maybe. It seems like they had about 100 ideas that were decent, and instead of picking a couple good ones and really going in on them, they try to do all of them, so they end up doing none of them. I want to talk about Makee and then finally the Arbiter. Makee is a zombie, I guess, because she's just suddenly undead. Aside from that idiocy, which never gets explained, her only character trait is cultist, zealot, and she's kind of in love with Chief. None of her story really makes sense. She orders the Arbiter around, but then she's afraid of him in the Covenant. She's a 1 in a billion blessed one who can use the Forerunner artifacts, and she likes the Covenant, but they're threatening her for some reason while she's also giving them orders. There's not a ton to say about her because there's simply not much to her. She's another one who's just kind of a walking plot device. But they clearly plugged her in for what would have been the Arbiter in Halo 2 because they needed to save money on the CGI. Obviously, I don't like that to begin with, but they could have at least fleshed her out, fleshed the Arbiter out, and at least helped us explore the Covenant side of things in the TV show. They pretty much just rely on everyone with the video game knowledge filling in this entire part of the story with their prior knowledge, because the show doesn't explain shit from the Covenant. It would have been nice if we had actually explored some of her ideas, because she doesn't really say anything besides, everything sucks, I'm going to kill everyone and just start over. Like, she wants to have Noah's Ark with her and John on the Halo ring. It would have been nice if they had been like, oh, the Covenant has found more blessed ones, now you're disposable. Then it makes sense when they threaten her. Or, you know, if we had seen that maybe she's not a true believer, she's just manipulating the Arbiter. Or if we had seen that she is a true believer, but she's trying to save her life also. Or if her and the Arbiter had gotten a little bit into sort of the structure of the Covenant and the politics. We don't do any of that. She's bossing them around, and then she's also afraid of them, and then they try to kill her. And then the Arbiter, because he's a true believer, buys into her bullshit. Which is crazy. The Arbiter might be the only character who's like mildly interesting out of the whole cast of like a dozen people that I just mentioned in this video. And the last character I'm going to talk about is the Arbiter. The Arbiter is another one that has like the bare bones of a decent arc, but it really relies on you already knowing the lore to fully understand it. The idea of him being so loyal to his ideology that he's able to be manipulated by Makee, betray the prophets, kill his own crew, and then get to Halo, which is his religious goal, only to end up dying, being killed by a demon, could have been a pretty interesting arc. Unfortunately, the dynamic between him and Makee makes no sense, like I said, and because they couldn't really afford to put him on screen, we just don't get much time with him. These traits about him being a religious zealot are pretty much all we know about him, and another good idea kind of wasted in a dog shit show. Even in Halo 2 alone, the Arbiter's arc is really interesting. He's supposed to be super high up in their military hierarchy, he's destroyed all kinds of colonies, he's been great for the Covenant as a leader, but then he failed to stop the Master Chief on Halo, not really his fault, and now the blame is being put on him, where he's being given this role of Arbiter, where essentially his job is to die with glory. And he fully embraces this because of his beliefs, and he actually kills a heretic who tries to tell him otherwise, only to find out later on that the heretic was telling the truth. And then he realized that his entire life has been a lie, and he has to join up with the demon that got him in trouble in the first place. And this is what causes the great schism in the Covenant. Like, that's an awesome arc. Way more explored in like an hour and a half of cutscenes than anything we get with the Arbiter in this show. Again, they really bit themselves in the ass, not just focusing on a few things and going really deep into them and trying to just cover a shitload of stuff. But that's it for me for the character discussion. You can see the characters are really all over the place. There's no consistency. I didn't even really mention any goals of the characters because any goals that they have are not very specific. They're all kind of nebulous. Even John's is just find Halo, win the war. Super vague goal, no real consistent principles or judgment or morals. They're not very fun characters. Everyone's pretty dour and serious. So just a huge failure in that capacity as a show. Let's get on to part 3, the world building. The topics that I want to discuss for the world building are the Human Covenant War, the UNSC, the Fall of Reach, the spike to blow up the Covenant ship, the Spartan IIIs, the Mjolnir Armor, and then I just have a whole bunch of general issues that don't really need their own category, but there's a bunch of things that just cause problems. Again, I'll include timestamps in the description for each one, so if there's a specific thing that you're interested in, just click the timestamp. So I want to start off with the Human Covenant War. The way that they've handled the Human Covenant War is one of the biggest issues that the show has had over both seasons. One particular issue with it is that you have no way of knowing what the scale, threat, or cause of this war is just from the show. They talked a little bit about the Great Journey and stuff, but there's not really much beyond that for the Covenant side. Sure, throughout the show, they'll say over and over the Covenant's dangerous. We'll see them glass a place that has no people, and they'll reference the Great Journey. But 90% of the show's conflict is that the humans are more worried about fighting each other than the Covenant, which really downplays the threat that the Covenant is. In this season, the humans literally say, let them have Reach, Cortana, a Forerunner artifact, we'll just run. And then from all we see on Reach, it's just one city, and that's it. We see the elites fight like zombies, no shielding, no ranged weapons like guns. They just run directly at gunfire, getting mowed down in hordes. The Covenant are pretty much a backdrop in this series for what the real conflict is, and that's the conflict between Jimmy Rings and Oni. In episode 5, he literally says his priority is getting revenge on Parangosky and Ackerson when he's supposed to be grieving about Vanek. If you just watch the show, there's no indication that the Covenant is an existential threat to humanity. We don't see fleets getting decimated despite having them outnumbered. We don't see super accurate slip space jumps that they can do and we can't. And as far as we can tell from the show, our technology is almost equal to theirs, to the point where we can reverse engineer their ships to create doomsday devices. If you think about the introduction to the Covenant in Halo Combat Evolved, one of the first things he says is Cortana. All I need to know is, did we lose them? And she says, we both know the answer to that. And he's desperate enough to land on Halo when they don't have any idea what it is, and everyone has to completely abandon ship because it's falling apart. What the show has done is turn the Covenant into kind of just an annoyance. It also really undermines the threat of the Flood, on top of the way that the Flood was revealed, which undermines it as well. In the show, they're just revealed, and for all we know, they're just zombies. If you just watch the show, there's no way you can know more than that. Anything else that you say is pulling from the lore. In the game, Cortana panics for the first time after being quippy and calm and kind of fun the entire game, and she says, "Go now," to John. You see the Covenant fleeing the structure, you see their corpses, it's all very mysterious, you're in a swamp and it's foggy, and then you watch that helmet cam footage, and that's where you get the reveal. And the first time you see that, it's a total oh shit moment, because you understand that if the Covenant's scared, you're in trouble. So all of this really undermines the Human Covenant conflict. And then on top of that, the UNSC is literally trying to get rid of their own most valuable assets, the Spartans. And again, it's like, how scary are the Covenant really? If we can worry about politicking and getting rid of our best weapons, we'll deal with them later, no big deal. The show has completely undercut the scale of the threat that the Covenant is. I want to move on to the UNSC next. Like I just kind of hinted at, the UNSC has been turned into the villain of the series. Again, it undermines the threat that the Covenant is, but it also just makes the UNSC evil, and the way they do things is retarded. Both seasons, they've been the primary antagonist, first mainly through Halsey, and now through Ackerson and Parangosky. Even though the show hasn't emphasized the importance of Reach explicitly, it's clearly significant because it's where a shitload of military leadership is, a military base, both Forerunner artifacts, all the Spartans reside there. Their decision regarding Reach is just to say, meh, and ditch it completely. They've also been claiming that John is rogue for almost 2 full seasons, yet they can't figure out how to wrangle him in. He's one person, Spartan or not. Their plan this season was to sacrifice Reach and essentially have the same fight that they would have had at Onyx. So they give away a planet, sacrifice millions of lives and an untold number of soldiers' lives, and some Spartan IIs to have the same fight in a different place. This plan, which people praise as clever, hinges on someone finding Cortana and knowing what she is, not just destroying her immediately, taking her somewhere important while she's also able to communicate with the humans, and this information being the key to turning the tide of the battle. Spoiler, it does not. None of it makes any sense. The second part of this plan is to use a ton of barely trained kamikaze soldiers and destroy an entire solar system and Halo, which they believe is the key to winning the war. Again, there's just no clear thought of any kind of intelligence or goals or anything. On the UNSC side, we see Parangosky, Ackerson, and then side characters like Megan Rapinoe just being straight up evil to Master Cheeks for no reason. They also fail to kill him or simply refuse to over and over when they can literally just shoot him on sight. They let him wander around these top secret military bases and the city while also saying that he's crazy and rogue. Their military bases seem to just allow people to walk in and out like they're going to the food court at the mall. Just so you guys have some kind of awareness of what a military base functions like that's not top secret, I've been on multiple military bases as part of my job, and you have to have the lowest level of government clearance to give them at the gate and they'll let you through. Or you have to give them your driver's license and they take a bunch of information from you, inspect your whole car, and then they let you through. This show doesn't do anything, and these are top secret bases. So the show has done everything in its power to make the UNSC both incompetent and evil at a huge detriment to the story. And look, in the lore, the UNSC does have a little bit of infighting, a little bit of politicking, as all organizations do, but the goal of everyone is to keep humanity alive and win the war against the Covenant. Beating the Covenant is the focus of everyone. There's different philosophies and approaches, but they have the same goal. In the books, Ackerson hates the Spartan IIs because he wants funding for the Spartan IIIs, which he created. The Spartan IIIs do end up being crucial to the story and accomplishing great things. The show captures none of this. The next world building thing I want to talk about is the Fall of Reach. The Fall of Reach was one city and about half an episode of the entire season. It's deemed as no big deal to just throw it away. Aside from what this does to the UNSC, like I just mentioned, it completely undermines the desperation and significance of the Fall of Reach in the book or game. In the book, which is the first in the series, you're essentially starting with the humans having their morale completely destroyed because they thought Reach was impenetrable. And something really dumb the show did was just gloss over it. If they were smarter, they would have introduced other Spartans earlier, developed them, and then when John has to leave Reach, he believes that he's the only Spartan left alive, but we see the other Spartans hanging on to Reach as the audience, so we know they're alive. They're the ones who fight to protect valuable assets, fighting to the bitter end while killing tons of enemies. And if there was a season 3, you could have had branching plot lines, one of the chief and one of the other Spartans hanging on to Reach for a season, or a season and a half, and then when they reunite, you get the big emotional payoff for Master Chief. The show settled for just telling the audience and marketing, hey, the Fall of Reach is a really big deal, but then it's just treated like a sacrificial pawn and completely insignificant. It's just a complete waste and seems like having the reference for the sake of the reference, so the fans will go, oh my god, the Fall of Reach, and then they'll fill in the gaps for the rest of what went on and the importance of it. It's just a massive disappointment, and now there's no one doing it. They glossed over it in an episode. Maybe even less, depending on how you want to look at it. The next world building thing that I want to talk about is the spike. The spike to overload the Covenant ship and explode everything is just absolutely fucking retarded world building. First of all, how did they get a Covenant ship and learn this much about it? How did they test it to know the effect of the spike if it destroys a solar system? The Covenant probably would have discovered this flaw just accidentally over the course of tens of thousands of years and either fixed it or used it to genocide the humans with a couple dozen ships, and the war would just be over. The writers also seem to have no concept of the scale of space and how big it actually is. The simulation says, you can see it in the picture, that it'll destroy the entire system, including Halo. Later on in this episode, Ackerson says it has a 1 million mile radius. Just to give some perspective, our sun is 93 million miles from Earth. Our moon is 240,000 miles away. How small is this solar system? And this is the type of thing that takes about 3 seconds to Google. And if you want to say, oh, well, it doesn't matter, you get the idea. It's a solar system. I mean, do physics work differently in this part of the galaxy? On top of just how lazy this is to begin with. This is the tiniest solar system ever. And really, just introducing a device like this completely changes space warfare. This reminds me of the kamikaze shit in The Last Jedi. If this is how it works, we would give every military person a spike, and eventually they'd be able to put them on timers, we'd have our ships flee space battles, and it would just blow up everything. Or we would tweak it to scale it down so it doesn't blow up an entire system, and we could just win battle after battle. it changes literally every facet of the war. The goal would just be to steal any Covenant ship, fly to their homeworld, boom, humans win. This is pretty just standard, stereotypical bad writing, where everything just needs to keep getting bigger and bigger, and the stakes need to get crazier and crazier, instead of just writing good characters and a good story that makes sense. Next, I want to talk about the Spartan IIIs. The entire way that the Spartan IIIs were handled in this nonsensical show was obviously just an obliteration of the lore, pretty much like everything else. If you only watch the show, as far as we can tell, Spartan IIIs are just untrained kamikaze soldiers with slightly different armor that may or may not be better. We don't actually even know. Perez is the best Spartan III after a week, when she was too scared to fight for the entire first half of the season. Ackerson brought Kai in to train them for about 2 weeks before their vital mission to turn the tide of the war, and she literally doesn't do anything except let them run through a simulator that shows no Covenant and shoots randomly. I don't know what kind of fucking training that is. Because, all those battlefields where shots just randomly come from the ether. Good preparation. The other aspect of this training is watching the Spartan IIIs as children get beat up like Rodney King by military officers with batons. Ackerson says that this is his life's work. This makes him a fucking idiot. Untrained kamikazes shouldn't be anyone's life's work. It also makes Kai look useless because the training is something that I could do right now. Hey guys, go sit in your video game chairs. Job done. In the lore, the Spartan IIIs are quote-unquote volunteer orphans. They're still 4, 5, and 6 years old, so volunteer is used very loosely. They take kids whose families were killed by the Covenant who want revenge and ask them if they want to join. Then they modify them, train them, give them SPI armor, and then Kurt trains them for years. They're sent on missions that would cost the UNSC thousands or tens of thousands of Marines, and on these missions, the Spartan IIIs are almost certain to die, but they're vital to Covenant infrastructure. So they're really important to buying the humans time while we try to adapt technology and come up with more permanent solutions to win the war. This also leads Kurt to chemically altering them for life in the later generations, so they need drugs just to be normal. And this branches off into really interesting plot lines later in books like Last Light, and that has its own little series. And the smoothers, which is what the drugs are called to help keep them stable, are a really big deal. None of this was captured in the show, and they don't really even seem to understand the purpose of the Spartan IIIs beyond the fact that they go on suicide missions. So it's just a really lazy, stupid iteration that makes no sense in the world, especially when tied in with the plot line of killing the Spartan IIs to use the IIIs as replacements. The last thing that I want to talk about before I get into the general issues is the Mjolnir. I want to talk about what they've done to armor and what it even means in this show. They make a huge deal out of the armor, while at the same time, John is still invincible without it. He beats the Sangheili to death one-on-one, gets shot with a plasma pistol point blank in the chest, then Vanek dies from one needle around. Riz gets shot, but is also crippled. There's just no real consistency. A lot of people seem to forget that last season, John fought against Vanek and Riz in their armor when he had no armor, and he was holding his own. And then we have scenes like from last season, where he rides on the bottom of a Banshee into a Phantom and just walks away. Obviously, he crashes the Covenant ship onto the Halo ring this season and just walks away, no big deal. So all that crazy stuff happens, but then you can see here, while he's sword dueling the Arbiter, a little bit of plasma comes off and it melts part of his chest plate. We already saw him just absorb Cortana into it magically. Kai looks completely unscathed after ramming 2 Covenant ships into one another. That'll depend on the contract renewal if they get a season 3. So really, it just seems like they have no idea what to do with the armor versus when they're unarmored. And now they've made the Spartans essentially so invincible that you actually have to wonder, is John retarded for ever taking his armor off during the supposedly serious Human Covenant war? At this point in time, if they kill one in armor, there's almost no way that they can do it that makes any kind of sense. Cobalt supposedly died in their armor. Don't know how that happened. And then you get ridiculous shit like this where they can fly faster in their armor than a Covenant ship, which are faster than human ships, because Chief catches up to Cortana's crashing ship. So the armor is just kind of functioning as, again, whatever the plot needs. Instead of having a hard set of rules and figuring out creative ways to make it work that makes sense, they just have the armor work like, needs to do this so it can. Worry about the consequences later. Just terrible world building. All this stuff with the armor just completely destroys any stakes, and there's just no clear goal in mind for the world building. And the last thing that I want to talk about is just the general issues, which there's a shitload of. So these general issues don't need their own category. They're just things that I want to talk about that make no sense. The obvious one is the blind gay Spartan who can fight like he's not blind. I don't believe that blindness exists in this world. The Spartans go through insane modifications, including enhanced eyesight, yet they can't replace eyeballs over 500 years in the future. Nonsense. And the fact that he can fight without eyes using a fucking grenade launcher, Also just ridiculous. The next thing I want to touch on is everything with Cortana, because it's crazy what they've done with her. How did she get brain drained from Chief? How does she control a UNSC base from a Covenant ship who knows how many light years away? How does she just get absorbed into his suit? And I know people will defend this saying, oh, he does it in Halo 2. Yes, in Halo 2, he has a chip in his helmet, and then she's transferred from the console into the chip, like Bluetooth in Halo 2. Her ability to just jump wherever she wants in this show across any distance makes her essentially like a universe-scale Ultron, where she can just possess any electric system that she can communicate with. Why not have her just call up High Charity, transfer to it, and blow it up? Also, her and Chief are just suddenly cool when he hated her last season, then died so she could be him, but better. They don't understand or put any thought into anything with her, and it's insane to me that I've probably called 3 or 4 characters at this point MacGuffins, but they really all are just magical walking devices, and Cortana is one of them. The idea that Halsey observed Forerunner ruins before the Spartan program and was studying them enough to pick children with DNA markers that matched up with the Forerunner technology, yet we never had any actual benefits from this technology, is just absurd. And something else, with her and Miranda investigating this door for who knows how long, at what point do you just dig in from the surface or use small-scale ordnance to get through the Forerunner doors and try to study what you want to? This also completely screws with the entire idea of Halo. How do they know what Halo is and what it does, but not where it is? How do they think it's a weapon? It's all just complete nonsense thrown together. Another thing I want to mention is Halo being so close to Onyx is just insane. The UNSC thought there was a black hole there, but never observed it. The UNSC can scan the Covenant fleet there like you can see in the image. Look how much detail there is. They couldn't see the fucking Halo ring. They don't have a telescope and can just look at it. Bizarre. Chief gets there after a short slipspace jump in a Condor. Another thing they do, the UNSC's military bases are just open. Even the image on screen, Soren and Laera just walked into where the Spartan III program is. Presumably, in theory at least, not the way the show did it, one of their most top secret high value programs. And civilians landed nearby and just popped on in, like they were stopping by a friend's house. The military in the show has no hierarchy that's respected at all. Everyone is disrespectful to Ackerson. They don't follow orders. They steal military ships. They go rogue. We don't ever see any consequences for it. We see them doing dumb shit, like sending men into a dark hallway in groups of 4 to just die 4 at a time. And why is the base blacked out to begin with? Who knows? None of this makes any sense as far as military stuff goes. Another broad issue is that Kwan is just suddenly an assassin badass with no explanation, and her magic shit is just crazy. Like there's this gene passed down, and presumably it should be in all kinds of people by now because it's been however many generations, and she may or may not be in control of the Flood, but I guess she's supposed to be the only one because she's special. And then on top of this, she may or may not be in control of the Flood, and maybe even if she isn't in control, she can resist them. And the old lady that she talks to, everyone sees on Sanctuary, so what are you even supposed to make of that? She can just walk around doing whatever the plot needs, no matter what. It just makes no sense. We get no explanations. They're kind of just hoping you'll fill in the blanks for them and be like, oh, okay, cool. Another walking MacGuffin. And then there's a whole bunch of random shit that I'm just going to kind of list off here. Like we have the guy changing the Spartan status by physically changing signs and it's not digital, just so John can yell at him. There seems to be no ships beyond Condors. They steal the Spartan's armor, calling it a valuable resource, even though literally no one else can use it. Again, reinforcing how dumb the UNSC is. The Kig-Yar use swords because they don't understand that the aliens actually have different cultures. We see one grunt for like half a second the entire season. The elites all have swords because they don't understand their hierarchy or cultural differences. Chief picks up a sword one time and uses it as well or better than the other elites and the Arbiter. How weak does this make them look? Keeping the pellets as part of the story and removing all the Spartans' agency was another really dumb choice since they did a soft reboot anyway. Makee being alive with no explanation and Chief coming back from the dead, again with no explanation, while Riz is somehow still injured. What kind of sense does that make? No one has helmet cameras suddenly and causes a ton of issues. Again, just lazy and not thought out. They use an ear tag on the indentured servants that can just be ripped out instead of something like an irremovable chip or a pellet like the Chief had. And like I already mentioned, the Spartan's armor can fly faster than Covenant ships just because Chief needs to catch up to Makee in space. I'm sure there's even more than that, but I went from the top of my head and kind of just clicking through the second season again. That's it for me as far as the world building stuff goes. I'm going to move on to part 4, which are the meta issues, which are probably my least favorite thing to discuss, but they impact the show, so I feel like they need to be talked about. So let's just get right into the most obvious one, which is the lore and the fans. The creators of the show look down on both Halo and the fans as not real art because it's based on a video game. And this is why they don't think the original books and games are good enough to just adapt the stories from. Pablo Schreiber straight up said, if you want Master Chief to wear his helmet, the show isn't for you. They don't care about the fans and routinely spit in their face. Unfortunately, they heavily rely on you filling in the gaps of their shitty story with your own knowledge of the lore. I don't believe for a second that anyone who had never heard of Halo and then just watched this show actually has any idea what's going on or how any of it makes sense. On top of this, and this is what I find disrespectful, is that they want to exploit the brand to tell their own stories and then use a shitload of surface level references without actually understanding anything behind the reference. So just a quick list of some of the references. You have the rubble, the name Reth, sword base, which is just a dark hallway, obviously Halo itself, Soren, even the way that Halo is used, random stuff like putting an original Xbox in the background of a thrift shop, the Arbiter, High Charity. The list goes on and on, but the point is clear. They want to exploit nostalgia to tell their own story. I've seen people speculate that they wanted to do Mass Effect but couldn't. I actually think they had like 3 or 4 original intellectual properties and then just merged them all into this story and called it Halo. For me, the show reads like John's arc is some kind of Mission Impossible inspired spy revenge thriller. Kwan seems like some sort of YA rebellion fantasy story. Soren and Laera, maybe something similar to like Taken. And they just slapped all these stories together. And I don't want to go too hard on the people that like the show, but it is annoying hearing defenses like, no one wants a one-to-one adaptation of the game, that's just boring. Of course he's going to take his helmet off, he's human. The show wouldn't reach a broader audience if they just used the story that already existed. And then whatever other things that people say to defend this shit. I wish that they would just be honest and say, it's Halo, I want to like it, and not try to rationalize it as these decisions needed to be made. The reality is, 90% of people will have no clue about the Halo story, and you can keep the base story and then just expand on it with your own original touches and characters and whatever. Right or wrong, people consider TV and movies to be the most important type of art and kind of the only legitimate art, and they look down on video games and animation. Like, these kind of defenses are coming from the same people that will say the regular story wouldn't appeal to a broader audience. The reason that you call the story Halo is because people know the name. People know the name Halo because the story has mass appeal. The Fall of Reach book, the Flood book, or even something like Contact Harvest or the Cole Protocol would appeal to a wide audience because they're good stories. Even Halo Infinite, which is far from Halo's peak, sold 81 million copies. Halo has mass appeal. 99.9% of fans would be okay with him taking the helmet off if it made sense and if the show was good. You'll see a lot of people dismiss criticism and be like, oh, you just wanted the video game. You're mad he took his helmet off, as if that's all there is to it. When he takes his helmet off because an insurrectionist is pointing a gun in his face, or when he's taking it off in a war zone, yeah, people are going to call it stupid. It's also a bit hard to take the he needs to take his helmet off thing seriously when we just had The Mandalorian probably be the most popular Disney Star Wars thing since they bought Star Wars. This also ignores that we have plenty of movies that don't even have a human protagonist, like WALL-E or The Iron Giant. Many of people's favorite Mass Effect characters are aliens. A lot of the defenses that I see for the show are just bullshit by people who want to like it because they love the Halo brand. And that's fine if that's what they want to do. Personally, I wish that these people would stop eating shit with a smile on their face and demand better from these corporations.
I say that because I'm not a toilet bowl you sit on and shit on. I'm not here to eat your fucking shit. You fucking got that?
We're supposed to be the customers. We shouldn't be grateful that they took something that we love to try to extract profit from it while destroying it at the same time. And to continue this point, I'll just go ahead and say, using kind of bullshit reasons to write him out of his armor for half the season or 3/4 of the season is just spitting in the face of the fans. The biggest complaints from the fans last season were that Kwan's annoying and she sucks, he had his helmet off too much, and there wasn't really that much action. So what do? Make Kwan more important, take his armor completely after an episode and a half, all the way until the finale, and they kept the same amount of action, but on a far lower budget. The little speech that he gives at the end of the show, where Pablo Schreiber looks right into the camera and talks about his armor being taken from him and bent to someone else's will, seems like a message to the fans to me. Not only does it not go out of its way to try to make the fans happy, I feel like they go out of their way to shit on them. And that's the biggest and most obvious meta issue. But the next one that I want to talk about is the writers. So there was a big hubbub about, oh, there's a new showrunner and new writers, and they're really going to reset things this season. You can go online right now, any Halo forum or subreddit or whatever, and the consensus will largely be, well, I don't know if season 2 was good, but it's way better than season 1. Is it really? And did they actually change anything from their formula? I would say no. I mean, if it's better, season 1 was maybe a 2 and Season 2 is a 2.5. We've got like a runny turd versus a solid turd. Way to go. I want to talk about the writers so that people understand the lack of care that went into this fucking show. So I'm using the IMDb just to go through the writers for each episode. I have episode 1 pulled up so you can see they just have writing credits listed. But the rest of the way, I'm just going to pull up the page of the writers themselves so you can see what they worked on. And obviously, if you don't believe me, you can just go to IMDb yourself, check the writers. I don't give a shit. So we can see the writing credits for episode 1. David Weiner, Kyle Killen, Stephen Kane, and Basil Lee Krelmendal. I'm sure I'm butchering that. So this is David Weiner's writing credits. 2 episodes of Halo. And then he has 9 episodes of Brave New World. Didn't know they did a TV show for it. 1 episode of Homecoming. 1 episode of Strange Angel. 2 episodes of Fear the Walking Dead. 2 episodes Flesh and Bone. 2 episodes of The Killing. Whisper of Fear, which was a TV movie. 2 episodes of Last Resort. And Leone, which is a screenplay. So that's his writing experience. You can think it's good, bad, whatever. Obviously, he's been a producer on a bunch of stuff. Next, we have Kyle Killen. He has credit on all 17 episodes. So for all the people trying to say, oh, it's totally different now, no. And then his other writing credits are all shit that I haven't heard of. I'm not going to go through the whole list. You can see the whole thing here. You can go look yourself. But the fact that I haven't even heard of him, I don't think is a good sign. Next, we have Stephen Kane. Also credit on all 17 Halo episodes. Again, for the people who are saying it's way different now. Now, to be fair to him, he does have better writing experience, it looks like. He got an episode of Jack Ryan, 56 episodes of The Last Ship. I haven't heard of it, but it sounds like it got a pretty full run, so that's good. Some random episodes on other shows, 17 on The Closer, pretty good. But still, all 17 on Halo, not good for the people who are claiming shit really changed behind the scenes. And the last one for episode 1 is Basil Lee Kremendal. All 8 episodes, staff writer. Maybe staff writers aren't that important. Don't know. He's on all 8. And you know what his other credits are? None. He's just written for Halo. So before I go through the rest of the episodes, because that was just episode 1, you can see the same people are still around. They do this weird writing by committee thing where they just throw random writers episodes here and there. I have no idea how you can tell a coherent story that way. And that's how they did it. I'm not going to keep renaming the people that are on every single episode, but the 3 that are on every episode are Kyle Killen, Stephen Kane, and Basil Lee Kremendal. So you can assume those 3 for all of them. And then I'm just going to talk about the ones that are different. So for episode 2, Amadou Garba. He has credit for 2 Halo episodes. And then just kind of random credits here and there. Nothing that I see is stuff that I recognize or is particularly impressive. So again, another writer without some great resume on a couple episodes just thrown in here. Episode 3, the same writers and Marisha Mukherjee. Decent experience on a couple shows like Titans and Quantico, but again, just hopped in for 1 episode of Halo and fucked off. I just don't understand how you can expect coherent storytelling like this. I think this also plays into why the story feels so disjointed, why the tone feels so all over the place over the course of the season, while the characters feel all over the place over the course of the season. Because you're just popping in these writers and be like, hey, come join us for an episode. And then taking their input. Episode 4, arguably the most important episode of the season. It's the same 3 guys, plus Tom Hemmings. This is his 1 writing credit. His other 2 are 2 shorts 10 years ago. He's got a bunch of credits as an editor, great, but the most important episode of the show, and they bring on a writer who's essentially never written anything. They might as well have brought me in. Episode 5 is one of the episodes that only has the main 3 that have credits on all 8, and it's arguably the worst episode of the season. So way to go there. Good job, guys. Episode 6, we have the main 3 plus Sarah McCarran. She's got 4 writing credits. 1 is a short in 2012. She's got 2 episodes from some show called Made for Love, and then 10 episodes for a TV miniseries called Station 11, again, which I haven't heard of. I would say maybe she's young and up and coming, except for that short 12 years ago. And then she's another one that they just popped her in for 1 episode of Halo, and then she went back to doing whatever she was doing. Episode 7, arguably the 3rd most important episode of the season, behind episode 4 and 8. And it's the same 3 and the guy Amadou Garba from episode 2. This is his other credit for Halo. And then episode 8, we're back to David Weiner again, and the other 3 guys that are part of all of it. The reason I took the time to go through this is because not a single person here seems to be part of really much success at all from a writing perspective, and they had the absolute bare minimum of experience to begin with, if they have it. And then on top of that, how can you tell a coherent story with 3 guys who are part of every episode, and then the other episodes are just including random people? I'm sure there's successful shows that do this, but I feel like the best writing you get is when you have a couple people with a focused vision and just let them do their thing. Maybe the studio needs to step in and rein them in sometimes. Obviously, this happens with creatives, but it's hard for me to imagine that having a whole bunch of different writers and different combinations of writers for every episode is a good formula. And like I said, people were excited about the new showrunner, and 2 of the 3 main writers are the same as season 1. So yeah, he can film it in a way that feels slightly different tonally and more gritty and blah, 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 whatever generic term you want to throw out for making the chief a little bit edgy and dark. But really, all the core elements are still there. To me, it sounds like the first season showrunner either didn't like the bad feedback or he got scapegoated. So they just completely railroaded him, brought in someone else, and then we're like, yeah, that guy was the problem in all the marketing. And I think the fact that they kept the core together is the exact reason that both seasons have kind of the same problems. And this also touches on why they didn't abandon shitty characters and plot lines that the fans said they didn't want. So I'm not going to talk about the writers anymore. The last couple of things I want to move on to are the budget, and then culture war nonsense will be last because my least favorite thing, as always. I'm not going to show a bunch of clips for the budget or pictures because you've already seen a ton of them. But this one's funny because Riz is like smiling like, oh, look at the blind guy go while he's launching a grenade launcher. So the budget for the first season was about $100 million for production. All the fights are in broad daylight. There's a lot of aliens, a lot of CGI, a lot of vehicles. All that shit's gone this season. They took away the armor so they didn't have to do any crazy movements. There's no grunts. Most of the action is like this. We were watching someone shoot and then just seeing muzzle flashes without seeing what they're actually shooting at. And the sets are all pretty much just dark gray hallways. And then a lot of the action is either off screen or in the fog or the dark. Here I pulled up a new image so you can see what I'm talking about. I watched an interview partway through the season where Kiki Wolfkill actually said flat out they wanted to do more with Reach, but simply didn't have the money.
You know, the battle for Reach is still going on. As we know from canon, that actually is a very extended battle. And as much as we would have loved to spend 4 episodes on it, we couldn't afford to.
And this is pretty apparent that money was an issue for all the reasons I just mentioned. And if the budget is the same or lower for a season 3 if it gets made, I think it's pretty safe to assume that they'll be on the actual surface of Halo for maybe part of an episode, and a bulk of it will take place in underground dark hallways. The Flood will be kind of like zombies. Maybe they'll steal some props from the Last of Us set, or they'll just travel through Halo and then blow it up in a couple episodes because they can't afford it. I could honestly see them doing that the way that the Fall of Reach was handled. And the last thing I'm going to talk about for the meta stuff is the culture war nonsense. It's my least favorite thing, so I'm going to try to keep it short. But as with many things in Hollywood right now, it seems like they made a concerted effort to put women at the forefront of this season in particular. Halsey went from villain to kind of good guy to a good mom suddenly. Chief is a total douchebag to Riz and Kai, and the show clearly thinks that both Riz and Kai are in the right. Laera just drags Soren around by the nose and yells at him repeatedly, and the show thinks that she's in the right for doing this. Kwan became even more magical, more badass, more important. And if you're part of the intersectional crowd, Kwan is a double win because she's both a woman and Asian. And of course, Asians are Schrodinger's minority. When they went to get into Harvard, they have white privilege. When we cast them in a show, it's diversity and Pacific Island representation or whatever bullshit. Continuing with my list, the best 2 Spartan IIIs are Perez, who's also Hispanic, another win for the intersectional crowd, and the chick whose name I can't be bothered to remember. We get some nice self-insert nonsense with Miranda being smarter than her mom, who's been studying this stuff literally since before she was born. Keys telling his boss to go fuck himself because he's the evil white man. Obviously, the guy partaking in human trafficking is a white man. The woman selling off indentured servants on the rubble beats up a bald white criminal man twice her size. Makee is in charge of the Arbiter and turns him and Chief into simps, with her golden taco presumably. Kai and Laera are the ones who make big self-sacrifices, along with Keys and Vanek. Women and minorities. Obviously, we've got the ginger, body-positive, blind gay Spartan and his husband sacrificing themselves. Soren suddenly turns into the stereotype of a black father and wants Kessler to get the shit kicked out of him for the symbolism of a black kid getting beat up by police. I'm sure there's more, but you get the idea. Any one of these things you can overlook, no big deal. But when there's 20 of them or 100 of them, at some point, it's just deliberate. Some of this stuff is surface level, but some of it actually does impact the story and the world building. And it's a shame because the Halo universe already has a ton of diversity in the way that Hollywood prefers diversity. And everyone loves a ton of the main characters, including the aliens. Everyone loves Sergeant Johnson. A lot of people like Halsey as a character. Everyone loves Cortana. A lot of people like Kelly and Linda. For the newer book readers, Veda Lopez is awesome. So there's just no need to force it. They could have kept the story intact and gotten all the representation they wanted to. Oh well, I guess. That's it for the meta stuff. We're coming up to part 5, which will be the last part of the video. And this is why I go through the story and suggest improvements since I've spent so much time criticizing it. I'm just going to work within the bounds of the show and talk about changes, not do a full fan fiction rewrite. Season 2, Episode 1 is where I'll take the most liberty because that's the place that has the most opportunity for soft resets, which the show did not take advantage of in the least. I'm going to go plot line by plot line for each character in each episode, just like I did Part 1, Episode 1. If I was going to do a 6-month jump and soft reset, I would have left Makee dead, killed Kwan in the magical glassing, gotten rid of the emotional suppression pellets, and used the first half of the season to introduce Ackerson, make it clear how important Reach is, and bring in other Spartans to really maximize the fall of Reach and make it more similar to the book. Then, when Chief leaves for a more important mission, you have the Reach story still going with Spartans you care about, and you have Chief's journey, where he believes he's alone now, or maybe it's only him and Kai for the show. I would have also included flashbacks to their childhood training and them growing up together, fighting insurrectionists. This helps you get closer to canon and the new Spartan characters. I would have had this go on the entire season, with Chief leaving at the very end thinking that he's the last Spartan and Reach is lost, but we know it isn't lost just quite yet, and the other Spartans are still there. This gives a chance to explore Halsey, Keyes, Parangosky, Ackerson, and the Arbiter in more depth as well. So that would have been my soft reset and a total redirection of the plot. For the direction the show went, I would have introduced the Spartan 3 program and Ackerson with some training and maybe a couple Spartan 3s that you get to know better and care about. Set this up so that the Chief sees it later and he sees them as an abomination or a shitty version of himself or however you want so that he has to reconcile with it. To get the season started, since we had to bring Chief back from the dead, I would have had a line like, Cortana, we designed a chip that's compatible with you. Once John's stable, please transfer to it so we can bring him back. Obviously, nothing is going to completely fix him being dead, but at least that's something. They don't even acknowledge it. On Sanctuary, I would have had Vanek, Riz, and Kai talk about their new desires now that they can think clearly, and let this be the build-up for Riz retiring and Vanek having some kind of goal or dream or something before he dies, instead of just kind of making him an animal lover as a joke, so that when he dies, it really has no weight. Maybe now that their mind's clear, they can remember their family and friends from before they got taken, or some special people they met during their missions, some kind of life goal. And then Kai can still choose to be a Spartan, like she does in the show, because I think that would definitely happen with some of the characters. If they wanted to go to the route of questioning John's mental stability, it would have been more interesting to make him kind of an unreliable narrator. Like maybe he hears Cortana's voice a bit, maybe he's a bit confused about whether or not she's there. If they hadn't actually brought Makee back, that could have also played into it, and it would have been interesting whether or not he was really seeing her. They could have also shown his camera feed was out or messed up, and we could try to figure out if he got knocked out by the Covenant, Oni sabotaged it, just faulty. All of this could have made it way more interesting for the angle that they were trying to go, instead of just, we know John is right, and they're lying to him. The next scene where they meet Ackerson for the first time, I would have had John say that they're looking for something because they didn't glass it straight away, instead of this practicing an invasion bullshit, and then possibly have Ackerson come in and Keyes just stops talking mid-sentence and salutes him, and then you've established a clear hierarchy without this cringe-ass, who's he? He's the boss. Like, fuck you, it's so lazy. And I like the idea of Chief getting used for propaganda, but nothing in the show ever really comes from it. Like, all we get from it is that John seems a little bit annoyed, and then they use it for the Spartan 3s later on to be like, you can be the next Master Chief. It would have been neat to show a couple fights, like in Halo 2 on the level Metropolis, where the soldiers are like really beaten up and injured and out of breath, and he shows up, and they're like, is that really a Spartan? We're saved. And that's way more impactful than just some hologram propaganda around the military base, which is all the show gives us. If they want to force this Chief missing Cortana thing, they probably should have done the thing where he's having nightmares, and using the nightmares to create flashbacks of them growing closer to try to fix season 1 to some degree, instead of this weird, he's simping at a digital strip club thing where he's a regular. So that's it for him for episode 1. I'm going to move on to Ackerson and Parangosky now. The Ackerson and Parangosky gaslight John plotline, I don't think works at all, because we know that he's right, and their ultimate plan is to replace him with kamikazes, which just makes no sense. I think it would have been a lot smarter to have Ackerson be aware of John's strip club activities and saying that he was seeing things, but then actually be sincere about it instead of this obviously evil in a way that the audience realizes type thing. And if they actually wanted John to recover and they weren't trying to replace him with suicidal soldiers, they wanted to make him stable, which he isn't in the show. He acts crazy. This all would have made this plotline much easier to digest and much more interesting. And in case you're wondering if he's actually stable or not, he did try to punch Halsey, and he just yells at his friends / subordinates routinely, and then threatens Ackerson all throughout the first half of the season, and the second half. I think Ackerson reluctantly sidelining Chief also would have made him way more redeemable later, and again makes him way more interesting than having him be cartoonishly evil, but then we're supposed to feel bad for him. A really cool thing they could have done would have been to have Ackerson and Parangosky just sending Silver Team on suicide missions, and even if they don't have the budget to show all of them, they could just show brief flashes, but John just keeps surviving. This would make him a badass, Parangosky and Ackerson not be retarded, and it'd be a nice parallel to the Arbiter. Of course, you would only know that from the games, but still, for the people who know the games, that would make them essentially the same type of person, just on opposite sides of the war. I'm going to move on to Soren for episode 1. His plotline, other than just getting rid of it outright, could have been more interesting if he had built the rubble up into like a stable little society, but had grown bored. But instead, he's collecting indentured servants at an auction, and he's kind of an asshole to his son and wife. They probably should have also had him be more oppressive to Laera to set her on this girl boss path that they wanted to pursue, instead of her just kind of flipping a switch because he fell for a dumb trap. And then last and also least, I'm going to go to Kwan's plot. Again, other than just axing it, they probably should have had her as enslaved completely, and then shown her fight her way out so we understand that, hey, she can fight now. They also need to give some kind of explanation for this magical shit. Even if they want to tie it into season 1 and she's having visions and shit, you have to explain something. You can't just throw magic and Kwan Wiccan whenever it's convenient. They also could have had Magical get glassed instead of Sanctuary, and Chief be there, and then he can take her back to Soren. Or Soren hear about Magical being glassed and go get her as a favor because they know each other. Not this weird coincidence shit where she just ends up in Kessler's closet like Harry Potter as an indentured servant seeing the future. Man, just lazy. Let's go on to episode 2. I'm going to start with Halsey for episode 2. She's just kind of a drifter. It would have been nice to see how she got caught because she's already outsmarted the UNSC before. And if you want to be really efficient, you could have had Ackerson and Parangosky be the ones to catch her, so we understand that even if they're not smarter than her, they're at least clever enough to catch her with the resources they have. The Ackerson-Halsey dynamic should have focused much more on him creating the Spartan IIIs, maybe have him seeking her advice and her not condoning it. They could have their little political struggle between each other, whatever. And maybe even have them both try to moralize like they're the better person. Ackerson has the IIIs as volunteers, but she thinks that the Spartan IIs are more important because they're saving humanity. There's all kinds of interesting conversations you could have between them. The whole thing with his sister being in the program just makes no sense, and it makes Ackerson look insane to just keep flash cloning his sister to psychologically torture somebody, especially when you want him to have a redemption arc later. This whole thing really undercuts it. I'm going to move on to Ackerson for episode 2, and he interacts with Kai also. Again, this would have been way more interesting between him and Kai if he actually was trying to help Chief instead of killing him. And I think Kai's setup here of covering for Chief is actually a good one, but then they kind of screw it up later. This could also be where Ackerson shows Kai footage of the Spartan IIIs, explains the program to her and the audience, and this shows that he trusts her not to leak the information to anyone, not even John. Like he's slowly working her to his side. He could also explain to her how much of a difference that she could make, and that this program has been running for years, but they lost their last Spartan II due to blah blah blah, funding, battle, whatever. And then this could create a really good tough decision between loyalty and being a good Spartan and doing her duty, which are both things that she values. And then this also could have elongated the Spartan 3 plot line so that when you include people like Perez, it makes more sense. And the fact that you have Kai training them means that the more time she has with them, the better trained they are. It makes more sense. For episode 2 for John, he threatens Ackerson and pretty much just acts unhinged and goes rogue. And not that I wanted to go this route, but again, it would have been way more interesting to see him actually try to go through the hierarchy. Maybe even go to therapy and realize, oh shit, maybe I'm crazy. And you could really play with his mental stability. Instead of just, no, he's right, him going rogue is badass. And this is also where they try to set up the arc of he's more than just the armor, but then they never do anything with it. If in the Fall of Reach later on, he fights really well, kills a lot of Covenant, but Reach just falls anyway because the UNSC gave up on it. Not because of anything he did. He's still a highly competent soldier, which he would be. He also interacts with Kai in this episode, and she says that she shot Makee, and he's a total dick to Riz in training. It would have been nice if Kai still believed in him because she's loyal. And also, they could have made him push Riz without being an ass. But there's really no need for any of this training shit because presumably they're always training, they're always on missions. There's no reason for them to go hard. They've been doing this their entire lives. I mean, maybe they could have shown us some Covenant invasions of other planets or something, some kind of strategic preparation. Really just a lot of unnecessary shit that makes him look like a worse person. He also just stalks Perez to her house completely inappropriately. It would have made him less weird and been a good start for her character arc if she initiated and reached out to him. And then this would have been like her taking the steps to get over her PTSD. You elongate the time a little bit so she can become a proficient Spartan 3, not just do it in a week. Just simple things like stretching the timeline I think really could have helped a lot of this stuff. I'm going to move on to Soren next really quickly. At this point, he's been tricked and taken and betrayed by his crew. This would make more sense if they had set this up where the crew was disgruntled and he had a bunch of wealth and he was hiding it or he was living like a big fat cat. But he pretty much just lives like them with like a slightly bigger rock. Just kind of lame. I'm going to move on to Riz really quickly because her arc just sucks so bad. But if you want her to quit being a Spartan, you have to use this time when she's talking to Louise to show her doing other shit. Let her have other goals. She looks down on the blind Spartan, and this could have been a conversation about how she's finally realizing that she misses having a normal life or some kind of thing, like a family or a hobby, just relaxing and enjoying her time, whatever it is. Maybe life's not worth living if all she does is fight and wait until she dies. Some kind of setup. They just do nothing with it. And to end episode 2 isn't any specific character, but the episode ends with these stupid deaths in a dark hallway. Just have the enemies on radar. Then they all walk in to investigate, but they don't see anything. We can see the camo shimmering, and then a sword ignites. Cut to black. Done. Show Makee, end the episode. Instead, they made the UNSC just stupid. And for some reason, their base is lit like a movie theater. Just makes no sense. And again, it feels like one of those things that if they had actually cared, could have been fixed in about a 30-second conversation. Let's move on to episode 3. Episode 3 is where we start to get the John going rogue and lying to his team shit for drama. I feel like this could have easily been resolved if John just told them the truth and asked for their trust. They followed him and he thought he was wrong and they all get punished and start questioning him instead of him just seeming like a crazy man and lying to them. This is also where he gets grounded. Even though he was already deemed unfit, he should actually be locked down to not make the UNSC seem incompetent instead of just walking away. Like, he's supposed to be grounded and was able just to hijack a condor. No big deal. For Kai this episode, this is where she's on board with Ackerson now, and she could reluctantly agree now that John seems unstable, but not like an asshole, which is what the show does. And we know, and she knows, that the Spartan 3 program is really important at this point because John's falling apart as far as she can tell. In my version, Ackerson would have already explained the Spartan 3 program to us. This would have made the whole story much more coherent, instead of them sacrificing coherency for the element of surprise by just tossing them in at the end of episode 5. I'm going to go through Ackerson next because he takes up quite a bit of time in episode 3. This is where we get the scene with his demented dad. This would have been way more impactful if he had been genuine so far instead of evil. Maybe we even see him pleading to get his father brought along instead of just saying he can't bring him. Joseph Morgan is probably the best actor that they have, and they completely wasted him. Cobalt team gets off-screened, another waste, and Keyes tells Ackerson to fuck himself. I think this scene would have made Keyes look so much better if Ackerson tried to order him to abandon Reach, and he gave a simple no sir, handed over his stars and bars, whatever, and then just said I'm staying. Much more appropriate for his character, still respectful, and he's honorable, but now he feels like he's bound by his duty to protect people instead of his duty assigned by the UNSC. I know people like to go fuck yourself, but I actually think it looks bad when you have Ackerson being like, this is a really tough decision, but we're the ones who had to make tough decisions. And he's trying to come across as reasonable and just explain it logically. And then Keyes responds emotionally. Obviously, the better thing overall would have been for them just to fight for Reach, but that's not the direction they went. Because, you know, the fall of Reach was just unimportant to them, even though they advertised for it the entire season. I'm not going to keep reiterating the Parangosky stuff, but what they did was dumb, and I mentioned other suggestions before. So let's just move on to Laera. The Laera escaping the pirate betrayers with Kwan's help works a lot better if we understand why Kwan can fight now. It could have also been interesting if, instead of her giving Kessler away, she brought Kessler with her and was trying to protect him and his mom, and then one of the betrayers grabbed Kessler and ran off, and then Laera and Kwan pursued him, and then he ended up escaping, and then you sell him to the child trafficker. Or they pursue him for a few episodes and we don't do any of that trafficking stuff, and then you can just figure out how he ends up at Onyx later. Could have had a nice little revenge story here too with the betrayer. Instead, they just do this off-screen, Kwan's a badass, trust us bro. It's completely unsatisfying. And last and least is Riz for episode 3. This is the part where she has dinner off-screen with the gay blind Spartan and husband. Again, how much more impactful would this have been if they were like, hey, why don't we go for a day out, the three of us? You know, they go walk around town. Maybe she looks envious of the happy families. Maybe they play some games and just have fun. You know, nothing competitive, nothing crazy. They're just out having a good time and enjoying themselves. Then when she quits, you're like, oh yeah, she looks so much happier around children and families in this lifestyle. And it's nothing crazy or complicated, but it's far better than what we got, which is like, hey, we're going to do some stuff with Riz off screen. We want you just to fill in why you think she just quit being a Spartan after she's been doing it her entire life. And 2 episodes ago said that she'd rather die than not be a Spartan. Let's move on to episode 4. Episode 4 is The Fall of Reach. Obviously, this would have been a lot better if it lasted the rest of the season, but let's just work with what we have here. So just episode 4. The stuff with Perez and Chief is okay, but it would have been nice to see her be a little bit brave here. Maybe help some civilians with the chaos going on instead of just panicking. Even if they just did the thing where like Chief's in the fight with the Sangheili, he doesn't have his armor, and another elite is coming, and she just throws something at it to knock it off course or runs into it to knock it off course, just enough to buy him time to kill it. Like, it would have just been nice to start to see those little inklings of her bravery, so that when she becomes a Spartan 3, you're like, oh yeah, like she's overcoming her PTSD. It also would have been really nice if we got some shots around the globe of elites with plasma rifles just mowing down civilians, just to do something to show the scale of this, because we literally see one city and then a brief flash next episode of Makee watching it burn. Also here, they want to do some more self-sacrifices that you're supposed to be emotional about. Would have been great to know more about the gay blind Spartan and his husband, so their sacrifices mean something. Also, John looked torn between getting to HQ and helping civilians. He's just kind of like, peace out, bitches. Which kind of either makes him seem like a dick or a coward, depending on how you want to look at it. Obviously, none of them have their armor here, probably because of the budget and the dumbass script. But going the direction that they don't have their armor, it would have been cool to see Silver Team just operating really cool and efficiently all around the city, even without armor. And they just fight until it's a completely lost cause and they're totally overrun. So they're not just throwing their lives away. For Keyes, he probably should have ordered someone else to sacrifice themselves. Or if he had just gotten shot as he was hitting the button or something. The way that this whole scene is shot is just goofy. Like, they're all just staying there letting him push the button and kind of chilling. Also, he can say, can I get a light? Fuck off. I already mentioned this, but it would have been good to see Perez helping people and being brave and maybe the last one to board the ship type deal. Instead, she just kind of becomes faux hammer. And just these little things would have really helped flesh out her arc. Even if she's taking shots at the Covenant, but they're really poorly aimed because she's on the comms team and not like infantry or something. Like, those are all things that you can set up for later down the line. And then you see her popping off headshots later and you're like, oh, Kai really trained her well. The whole duel between John and the Arbiter, they probably should have had John fight the Arbiter, but clearly be losing. But he can't escape. Obviously, there's nowhere to go. But he shouldn't really be familiar with energy swords and how to fight with them. And the Arbiter is a lifelong expert. And then you can do all the dramatic stuff where everyone's like, John, we need to go. And he's like, no, I'm not going to give up on Reach. It's my home, blah, blah, blah. All the way until Vanek and Keyes are dead. And then he finally has to give in and call for evac. Some kind of evac signal also would have set up for Laera and Kwan to find them, instead of them just magically showing up to the one hallway where everyone goes when they get to Reach, I guess. The Arbiter and Makee came here, John and his team came here, Soren and Halsey end up here, Laera and Kwan end up here. Kai feels guilty about this hallway even though she wasn't here. That was it for the main plot for episode 4. I'm just going to talk about Halsey and Soren really quickly. Their plot line is just to get everyone to the same place. Again, would have been awesome to see some interesting conversation where Soren's mad at Halsey for kidnapping him, but maybe he's also grateful because it led him to the man he is now, and he's got kind of mixed feelings for her because she took away his choices, but it did work out in the end, and he's happy. You know, you can do the thing where his colony got glass, so he wouldn't even be alive most likely, to try to help bolster Halsey's side of that argument. And they kind of did like a really half-assed version of this, where she's like, yeah, I let you escape after I kidnapped you. And then he seems nostalgic for the Spartans all of a sudden. It's just weird. They should have set up the logistics of how Cortana works in this episode and had someone, it doesn't even matter who, just say, yeah, Cortana can split off part of her personality into a separate chip, and that was the bait for the Covenant. And obviously this is the type of thing you can just slip a small line in earlier so that we know how she works, but instead the show just makes her magic. Alright, on to episode 5. Episode 5. This is why I said it would make more sense to have a distress signal of some kind for Kwan and Laera to show up. They should have had the Spartans fight their way out, and you get the big dramatic escape. Then you can have them get shot and be in comas, so it isn't a total clean getaway. I'll be honest, this episode is the one that I had the least amount of suggestions for, because it's just such a mess. I think one thing they could have done for John's emotional awakening may have been to stretch this out for like 6 months. This would allow for a gradual personality change to make more sense. It would make more sense for Perez to become a good Spartan 3. It would make more sense for them finding Onyx instead of finding it in a couple days. And then when John shows up to the base, everyone would be really surprised that he's alive. I mean, they act surprised anyway, but there's a way different element of, oh, he's been missing for a couple days than he's been gone for months and we didn't know where he was. All of this would have been enhanced by the timeline being stretched out. You could have John live like a day-to-day life to humanize him. Riz can go through physical therapy and get attached to the people here. So then when she retires, it makes more sense because it's already been set up the last couple episodes, and now she's found a new place to form connections. And then Soren and Laera could be scouring this planet for Kessler instead of going straight to the guy with the name on the book who knows exactly where he is in a few hours. That's it for the main plot line. For the other plot line, which is Makee, they could have started her stuff in like episode 1 or 2. It would have been really cool to see the Covenant treatment of her after season 1. And then if we had seen the Covenant treat her poorly, then her betrayal of them would make a lot more sense. We could have used some time in the first couple episodes for Arbiter's backstory and how he got to where he is, so we understand his motives. And instead, she's telling the Arbiter what to do and he's listening, but then Arbiter's subordinates are like, we're going to kill you because we don't like you. A smart move also would have been for them to be like, oh, we found another Blessed One who's willing to cooperate. Now she really is under threat if she doesn't get results, instead of them threatening her when they need her. And as far as we know, she's the only one they have. Because what they need is a Blessed One, which is 1 in a billion, and a Blessed One who will work with them and not just kill themselves or something. They really could have done quite a bit with this side of the story and made it really interesting and given the audience a lot more insight into the Covenant. That's what Halo 2 did for the gamers. For the show-only people, they don't really get that insight. So they really should have maximized their efficiency here and used their time a lot more wisely to show us both sides of this conflict and make us care about the other characters too. This episode ends with the Spartan 3s getting revealed, but I've already mentioned my fixes for that, and they would have started in episode 1. So let's just get in episode 6. For episode 6, I'm going to start with Perez. I already mentioned stretching the timeline. I'm not sure if I can think of another fix beyond starting her arc earlier, but no matter what, this entire season is compressed into like a 1-month window, if even that. So it's really hard to have her arc with the story structure the way it is right now. The Spartan 3 training should probably involve Kai directly instead of just simulations. You can do the thing where it's her versus them and they need to beat her, but they never do until right before the mission. And then you see why she was training them and you see them get better. Super simple. Better than the simulation nonsense. This is a funny screenshot. I'm definitely keeping it. Pretty much everything with John is broken because the top secret base is just not very secure. Again, the smart thing would be for him to get arrested right as he lands, interrogated about the events on Reach. This gives the UNSC a reason to keep him alive instead of just shoot him on sight, which they're supposed to do, but then never do over and over. Everything with Kai and Ackerson would have been way better if Ackerson mentioned Reach falling and Makee and Kai makes a face but says nothing. Then when she finds John, she just sides with him because she figured out the truth instead of just saying that she trusts him after she obliterates him. The Cortana John time would have been so much better if we'd seen more of his emotional distress without her. Like the nightmares that I mentioned, or since she can do anything, just have her reach out to him secretly and they form a connection in private. This way, when they reunite, you have that moment where you're like, finally. If you only watch the show, he hated her in season 1 and they haven't interacted for 3/4 of season 2. There's no earning the payoff that they want here, where they want you to be relieved that they're back together or excited or whatever. The whole Kwan Halsey thing, I actually don't even know how you could make it work. Maybe you can do the thing where she's getting headaches the closer she is to Forerunner stuff, and Halsey asks her what's wrong and she's taking her to it. Instead of just this weird, inexplicable magic woman and tripping into a Forerunner well, then you have Miranda and Halsey team up and together they solve it. Maybe Kwan's got a bunch of thoughts that are like jumbled, so she's giving vague, riddle-like clues, instead of Kwan just walking in and being like, oh yeah, I'm magic, bitch, and then just realigning the stars and fixing it for them, which is what this eventually leads to. Parangosky is really broken by this point in the season, but it would have made way more sense for her to be like, Ackerson, we're in this together. instead of saying she's going to railroad him to his face. And then when she arrests him, after saying we're in this together, you can have that moment where you're like, what a bitch. Like she fucking betrayed him. Instead, she's like, Ackerson, if this fails, I will betray you. So then he's like, oh, okay. I guess I should betray you then. I feel like a lot of simple corrections like this could make the show be at least okay instead of dog shit. Soren and Laera, this is another one that I think is really tough to fix because they just walk into an Oni facility unhindered. What they probably should have done is shown Kessler trying to sneak away a few times. And then you have Soren get here and be like, oh, if I was Kessler, I would try to escape like this. And then they just happen to meet up. Still kind of bullshit, but at least that's something where they're both thinking like escape artists and their father and son. So you can have a little bit of justification for it instead of just strolling into the top secret Spartan III program. I'm actually okay with the Arbiter and Makee part in this one. He says screw the prophets and then trust in her. This would all be so much more impactful if we had seen more of what went on between him and the prophets and they had given him some reason to doubt them and not trust them completely. So that when he flips, it's not like he goes from loyal zealot to the prophets to just being like Makee's simp. And then to end the episode here, it would have been a neat little touch if Cortana had been counting down to both of them to be like, I'm going to sync you up for the artifact. And that way they're not just touching the artifact at the same time somehow. Because Cortana's in the base obviously talking to Chief. She's on the ship talking to Makee. Easy little thing to add in. Just a voiceover. Don't even need to add visuals. Whatever. Let's go on to episode 7. We're at 75% of the way there. Episode 7. We start with John and Makee on Halo. I don't like this whole weird romance thing, obviously. But they probably should have had Makee and John lean into it and her want to start over with John on Halo and him maybe have feelings for her and want to until he realizes that she wants to kill everybody. When he's just roaming around the base, if Kai had been escorting him, you could have had the, oh shit, it's Master Chief moment, which is why the troops won't shoot him, instead of just them deciding to not follow orders and be like, nah, I'm good. Or have him just announce who he is, and then they can look on in awe or cower or whatever. This whole conversation that he has with Kai about sacrificing the threes would have been way more interesting if she had been torn between choosing to go with him or the threes, and then John was the one to be like, Kai, it's okay. They're your soldiers. Go with them. Again, would make way more sense with a much longer timeline. And then this would also help flesh out the humanity arc they were kind of going for than just abandoned. And this would also make more sense from Kai's end about why she would go with the threes instead of John, who she's known her whole life and fought next to her whole life. When John meets up with Perez right before the mission, once again, would have been really helped by the longer timeline. But either way, it would have been really cool if she was like shocked and also proud of what she had become thanks to him. Doesn't really feel earned in this story because she did it in a week. And instead, they kind of have her like guilt trip him because she's probably going to die. And they definitely should have gotten rid of all the references to this weird quasi predestination chosen one shit. You could even do the thing where he's like, Perez, just come with me. Like, I'll protect you. And that would have been a nice change and part of his humanity arc after he pretty much just dismissed her in episode 4. And he could have a little bit of regret because he's much more human now and empathetic than he was before. And then you have her decline because she's also changed and she's found her purpose and now she's not scared. But they just do some dramatic shit and move on, whatever. Obviously, it would have been much more improved if Parangosky just subtly betrayed Ackerson and him just get really pissed off about it. Also, would have been awesome to see the UNSC use some kind of tactics and not just send in a couple Condors at a time over and over to die needlessly. I think it goes without saying that the whole doomsday spike needs to go. You can have something where it overloads the engine, but it has a normal explosion, not a solar system, not a million miles. You can explain that they accidentally discovered the method on blah 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 mission and they were able to finally replicate it in the lab. And then you can have the big, we need the suicide mission to turn the tide of the battle moment without the threat being the entire solar system vanishing or being incinerated is the word they use. Hopping over to the Makee plotline, she should have had to rely way more on Cortana to escape the elite priest instead of her just outrunning him and hiding. The priest has to do the waddle thing, like the people who chased Leia in Obi-Wan, so they don't actually catch her. Easily could have just had Cortana pop up and making images appear of Makee randomly and screwing with him to buy time for her, and then you can have Makee and Cortana make a good little team before she destroys her next episode. I already touched on the Miranda, Kwan, Halsey plotline. It should have been Miranda and Halsey effort with Kwan, weird memory riddle type hints, until they figured it out instead of just magic. But whatever, she's the chosen Kwan. And then hopping over to Soren, he doesn't really have much time in this one. I think it would have been better if the three of them had actually tried to escape instead of Laera and Kessler just watching him beat the shit out of people. But then he's the only one who actually escapes this top secret base because he's a Spartan. And then he has to go back in for him in the finale, and he's familiar with the base. Super simple, but way less stagnant and just kind of stale than what we got. I already touched on Perez and John meeting up, but the Halo ring should have been in some remote location, and Cortana should have had to call Parangosky and be like, oh no, the Covenant found it, instead of putting it a stone's throw away from Onyx, where they've already scanned it and thought it was a black hole, and they've just somehow never seen it. So stupid. Let's get on to the finale. For the finale, let's start with Kwan. At this point, we have to have some kind of explanation for what the hell's happening with her and how she can just hold back the flood mentally, along with some better spread of the flood than a PhD biologist just intentionally spreading it and acting crazy and no one noticing. A better music choice would have been appreciated as well. Them taking Ackerson would have been much more meaningful if he let him out simply out of guilt and then Ackerson just tagged along, or Ackerson risked his life for Kessler or something. Like, we can't all just forget that a few episodes ago, he abandoned millions of people for a dumbass military tactic. The only justification that the show gives is, well, he shot a monster from a prison cell that was probably going to kill him also. I would have liked to have seen Parangosky start to transform into like a proto-Gravemind or something, because her death is lame. I guess they didn't have the budget to just rip her limb from limb, so she just kind of gets dry humped to death. Not too much to say about Miranda in this one. If there's a season 3, they'll probably just off-screen her escaping this lab anyway. If they're going to do that, would have been pretty sweet if it had ended with her getting a hazmat suit on and a sample or something and preparing to escape instead of just surrounded, because it looks like she's just screwed. They really should have had a clear mechanism of the flood spreading and also why certain people got it and why certain people didn't. From the show, it looks like it could be spores or bites or touch or the infection forms. Who knows? This is also needed to understand why only the main characters didn't get affected. There's no explanation, so it's like, oh, they're just wearing plot armor. The Kai and Perez stuff is mostly fine, but Kai probably should have had all the Spartan IIIs flee and then use the spike. I know they can't because they made a stupid doomsday device that would incinerate the entire system and Halo, but a more sensible spike also would have helped this. Obviously, now they're going to use it to blow up Halo in Season 3 if it happens. And then Perez kind of has no conclusion either way, which is just lame. Like, she sees Kai explode and then is like, huh, and that's it. I'm fine with Chief saving Kai and Perez and then going to Halo, but the logistics are a nightmare. And they gave him the cringe line of, you don't know what I'm capable of. I mean, make the battle just take place right over the ring if you want to do that. Or just let him grab a Banshee and fly to it. Something. They introduced the monitor, but it pretty much means nothing, especially to show-only people. They probably should have had the monitor explain what his duty was, and maybe touch on the ring, even if he just does it in vague terms. But like I said, him getting from Kai and Perez to Makee's ship with just his little suit thrusters is just dumb. Just have him steal a Banshee, Seraph, Phantom, get to Makee's ship, it's crashing, and then all you have to do with the shit with him and Cortana is him say, Cortana, I have the chip in my suit, hop in, or whatever. Boom, Bluetooth transfer, good to go. Then have Chief run to an escape ship, but maybe it's a little bit too late, so they're already in Halo's gravity well. So you can still have your crash landing, but it's a controlled crash landing, so he's not just invincible. Especially after you have Cortana say explicitly, we're gonna die, and then do a countdown to their death like it's New Year's Eve, and you're waiting for the ball to drop. I'm not sure how much you can do to improve the quality of this duel on Halo between him and the Arbiter, but I think it would probably look less fake if the entire background was CGI and they just added some cuts in instead of these one shots. They also should have taken out the really stupid stuff, like the Arbiter letting him live. You can see in the screen right here, he throws aside his sword so that he can punch his helmet over and over instead of just stabbing him. It should have really just been a struggle to the death. It would have been way different, but it might have been better to have Chief use an assault rifle or like a pistol sword combo. He's a human. He shouldn't be able to win the sword duel between him and the Arbiter, and then him punching Arby to death is just lame. You also can't have Makee just openly saying, I'm going to activate Halo and kill everyone and destroy everything, and then Chief just letting her walk away. It's insane. She either needs to be vague about her goals, or what Halo does needs to be unclear. Or he needs to like cut her down as she turns around, which would have been hardcore and pretty awesome actually. I think the cliffhanger that I would have ended on would have been the Covenant showing up instead of the UNSC. And that gives you this, oh shit, John's completely alone on Halo at this moment. They do a flash forward, obviously. I doubt it has any real meaning because they can just soft retcon it again. And that's it for Halo Season 2. My full review of plot, characters, world building, meta issues, and suggestions. As far as the suggestions go, what would you have changed to make it better? Besides just sticking to the lore, obviously. I think we'd all prefer that. If you're still here after watching this really long video, which will definitely be my longest, thanks very much for giving me a lot of your time. I have a membership tier now, thanks to the support from everybody, but I'm open to suggestions on what people actually want. I looked on a lot of bigger channels and they just seem to do like live stream shout outs and stuff. Comment your thoughts on the show below, maybe on the video as well. I do my best to respond to everything that's not an insult. Like and subscribe and all that. Thanks. See ya.